It was a snowy night when I pulled into the parking lot of my gas station. I worked the overnight 11 to 7 shift and had been at the job for several months before this. I really didn't like this job, but finding somewhere else to work was really difficult. Immediately, I knew I was right. It was way too cold for anyone to be in there with the car off, or for anyone to even be outside for more than a few minutes. I rushed over to the car and looked around, then put my face close to the window and tried to look inside. "Hello? Anyone in there? Just checking to see if you're okay," I called out, but from what I could see, there wasn't anyone inside. It wasn't exactly easy to see, so someone could have been, but I was pretty sure there wasn't. Now even more confused, I backed up and looked around at the empty gas station parking lot before starting to walk back. Now with my eyes not focused on the car, I was just looking at the ground and noticed shoe prints in the snow going toward the building. Not really the front of the building, but kind of off to the side. I looked back and saw that they seemed to come from the car, but at this point I was freezing and didn't want to investigate further without warming up a bit first. I hurried inside and turned on the small heater next to the counter, putting my hands in front of it to warm them up. I was only inside for 30 seconds to a minute though, before a thump resonated through the building from behind me. I spun around, not seeing anything, then walked around the counter and toward the back. On the floor, there were puddles of dirty water, like snow that had melted off someone's boots. Feeling a chill run through me, I stepped closer to the back room and turned the corner toward where the supply room was. Standing in the dark behind one of the shelves, I could see the outline of a figure. They were tall with broad shoulders and had a large scruffy beard, and they were looking right at me. My heart stopped for a moment, but after the initial shock, my reaction was to just walk back to the counter. I don't know why, maybe I was just too shocked to react appropriately. After staring at the doorway to the supply room for I don't even know how long, I quietly picked up the store phone and called the police, whispering for help. Then I endured the most unnerving 10 minutes of my life as I waited. During this time, I didn't hear or see anything from the supply room, which honestly added to my fear. For some reason, the man never came out to confront me. When 2 cops finally pulled in and came inside, I quietly told them where the man was. They searched the room while I stayed by the front, but I was shocked when they came out with nobody else. The man was gone. Watery shoe prints surrounded the back door, but outside were fresh tracks in the snow going straight away from the gas station, straight into the completely dark, empty field that led on for miles. Obviously, nobody could search that at night, but even when they did in the following days, they didn't find anything. I mean, the field was huge. He could have gone anywhere, but it was so cold and windy that night that I was almost sure that they'd find a body. The SUV was taken in for hopefully more information. I don't know how or why, but for some reason they couldn't find any history of ownership, so that left us with just what we know from that night. And we are still left with just that. Who the man was and what he was doing remains unsolved, and where he is now is just as much of a question.
We've all had traumatic things happen to us in life. Some are much more serious than others, and when I was in high school, something traumatic and horrifying happened to me when I stayed overnight at one of my buddies' houses. His parents were going out of town on Saturday night to celebrate their anniversary. He invited me over to just kind of kick it and hang out for the night so he wasn't alone. We did invite a few people over, played some games, but ultimately everyone left around 11 or so. He and I hung out for a little while longer, but then decided to lie down at around 2 in the morning. We were dozing off watching The Office when we heard a loud bang downstairs. I thought that it sounded like it was the door, but my friend said that they thought it was a neighbor and just to ignore it. He was pretty tired at that moment. And now we were both on the verge of sleeping, so we didn't overreact at first. Maybe it was just the neighbor. I mean, it could have been a bird hitting the house or something. And just as we convinced ourselves it was nothing to worry about, the knocks at the door started. Almost in a perfect rhythm, the bangs on the door echoed throughout the house. We had no idea at that moment what to do. This was clearly not a neighbor. This was real life, and there was someone knocking on the door at 2 in the morning. Every couple of seconds, the knocks would come again. Sometimes they were harder, and sometimes they were light knocks. It didn't matter what type of knock it was, just the thought that someone was standing out there at this hour was enough to scare us out of our wits. We both snuck over to one of the windows so we could catch a glimpse of the knocking person. It was just a normal-looking man we saw. He didn't look like some addict, a criminal, or even just really sketchy. He literally looked completely normal. He was wearing what seemed to be a nice pair of sneakers, jeans, and had a nice sort of Nike polo shirt on that you might even wear going golfing. His hair was short and parted, but neatly groomed, and he was clean-shaven. Not exactly a scary individual, but still just so weird and so unsettling given the time. We both looked at each other in confusion, trying to process what was happening and trying to think of the correct way to handle this. And then he started to bang on the door again, and we jumped down. Remember, this is 2 in the morning, so this could have been a Girl Scout selling cookies and it would have been unsettling. I was watching out the window while my friend was trying to call his parents. He was unsuccessful, but he kept trying. He wasn't smart enough to call the hotel or wherever they were staying, and the guy finally just walked away. But the relief was short-lived. Maybe 30 seconds later, he returned and taped a note on the front door. He didn't knock this time or anything, just left that note. He sat on the front steps for almost 5 minutes and then walked away. I kept looking outside, but I couldn't see him, and we both decided that whoever this character was, he had to have been gone now. My friend went to unlock the door, and I yelled at him to stop. He told me the guy was gone and that I had nothing to worry about anymore. He wanted to know what the note said, and I'm not going to lie, I wanted to know what it said as well. My friend opened the door and grabbed the note, and as he was pulling the tape off the door, we heard a loud, bellowing voice from the distance.
Hey, you!
And we both froze and looked up. The knocking man came out of the bushes from across the street and started to charge at the door. We both screamed as we were shutting the door, and another large man came out of the bushes and followed the man from earlier. My buddy slammed the door and was fortunate enough to get it locked before they reached the door. Both men started to pound on that door. Not knocking, pounding. I looked out the window and I saw the larger man who wasn't out there originally slamming his shoulder into the door. The bangs on the door were unrelenting and we started to fear the worst. Finally, my friend called the police and the guys outside must have heard what we were saying because they fled instantly. The police showed up and thankfully were able to get a hold of my friend's parents and they came home immediately. The worst part about all of this was the note that had been taped to the door. It was a very violent and detailed note about being at the house to pick up the money. I remember it saying things like no more running around, no more excuses, and a bunch of other things like that. The note was signed with some name like Leroy. His dad denied everything and claimed and swore up and down that he had no idea who this Leroy was and what money he was talking about. I remember it being very weird and very uncomfortable around this family for a while until it was all sort of forgotten about. My friend and I never forgot about that night though, and we still talk about it to this day. I wondered to myself all the time if his dad was secretly up to something. I mean, the note addressed him specifically by name. They knew where he lived, and then after that night, nothing ever happened again. It just all seems so weird. But I guess I don't know enough about the seedy underbelly of society to know if this is normal or not. We never got any more closure on that night, and trust me, I tried. One night we pestered his dad for an hour trying to get information, and he just kind of rolled his eyes, saying that it just must have been some weirdo playing a prank maybe. And whatever it was a horrible night and a horrible memory that I'll always remember. And to this day, I still don't like being home alone.
I worked at a restaurant with my older brother during our high school years. It was a really small restaurant in an outlet shopping center. We were both waiters there, but since the place was small, we often helped out all around, doing dishes, deliveries, or whatever they needed. But after just a year of working there, my brother graduated high school and chose to go to college, so he quit, but I kept working there. This happened a few months before I eventually left the job. It was Friday, so I was working a later shift than I usually did on other weekdays. The restaurant was open until 12 every night, but because of school, I usually never stayed later than 8 or 9. Anyway, I was scheduled to close this night alongside the manager. Everything was pretty normal, slowing down by 8 and getting a few people picking up orders for the rest of the evening. But at 10:30, my manager picked up a phone call for a delivery. By 11, I was driving out of the parking lot and onto the road. The address I was given on the receipt was just 8 minutes away, but as I drove a couple minutes down the road, I got a call from my manager. I answered right away, thinking they must have canceled, but apparently the guy called back saying he'd given the wrong address. I had to pull over and write down the new address. I typed in the new street and number into the GPS, but right away, I knew something was off. It wasn't close at all. It was 25 minutes away in the opposite direction of where I was going. If they had given this address to begin with, the order would have never been accepted. I thought about just going back to the restaurant and telling my manager, knowing he would understand, but I was already out and we already made the order, so I just started driving. The roads were already pretty empty around town at this time of night, but the further out I drove, the roads became even more empty. Like I didn't even see any more cars for the last 5 minutes of the drive. I was on the far edge of town, where most of the buildings and houses turned to grassy fields and trees. When I approached the road with the address, all I could see were a row of houses with all the lights off. As I drove down and past more of the houses, a few of them did have their porch lights on, but it still felt empty. It's worth mentioning that these were not the nicest houses either by any means. They were all single-story, box-style homes. I pulled up to the one I was to deliver to and parked on the side, getting out with the food. I felt the strange, eerie sense as I walked up to the door. It was quiet outside, and with no street lights and barely any house lights, it was really dark. I knocked on the door and waited. A whole minute passed with no signs of anyone being home, and I was starting to get a little bit more uneasy, so I just set the bag down and turned to walk back to my car. They hadn't paid yet, but the food was probably cold and it was no use to me anyway. When I looked over at my car though, a man was standing right behind it. He was leaned over like he was looking into the window. I stopped, and I don't know if the man heard me or what, but he immediately looked up at me. I could barely make out his face, but he was older. "Do you need something?" The man didn't move. I asked again, but nothing changed. Feeling that eerie sense getting bigger, I looked around, but didn't see anything other than trees in the dark. Then the man took a few steps back, moving away from my car and standing maybe 5 feet from the door. After a moment, I started walking over slowly, hoping to just get in and leave. As I got right up to the door, the man continued to stare at me from just a few feet away. I cautiously opened the door and rushed inside, but before I could even turn it on, the guy started yelling. I looked over at him, seeing him now facing the woods and just screaming. I turned my head slightly to look where he was looking, and in the woods, I could see 2 or maybe even 3 figures hurrying toward my car. My immediate thought was that this was a setup, and I needed to leave instantly before something happened. I quickly turned it on and reversed out, just as the man next to me tried to move behind the car in an attempt to stop me. I was able to get out, seeing and hearing the group of men yelling at me as I sped away. Cops were called, and although not much was able to be found, there were a few things. The house I was to deliver to apparently was a vacant property. It wasn't technically abandoned, but the owners didn't even live in the state anymore. It wasn't for sale either. It was just left as is, rotting away for the past decade. The caller that placed the order is unknown, but the initial address he gave seemed to have no significance. Who the group was, what they planned to do, and so many other things are left with no resolution, but I'll probably be wondering about it for the rest of my life. After all, had anything played out even a little bit differently, I may not even be here right now. I worked at a retail store in my 20s as an overnight lead. It wasn't one of your regular big chain grocery stores. It was a local place with only about 8 or 9 locations. Most nights I'd have an overnight stalker to help out, but it wasn't uncommon for me to spend the whole shift alone. Again, not the biggest store, so it really wasn't a very intense working environment. A lot of the time I'd find myself working slow, just so I wouldn't run out of things to do. This was one of those nights where I was alone and working at a steady pace. At the beginning of my shift, I loaded up some boxes and moved into the aisles to start stalking. It doesn't take much mental effort, so my mind was elsewhere and just thinking about random things, not really paying any attention. I went through about 3 aisles until a knock at the front entrance made me jump. I almost didn't even realize what it was because I was so spaced out, but once I did, I got really confused. I heard them knock again, loud enough to echo through the store. I walked down to the end of the aisle and looked through the large front windows, seeing a man in a hood standing at the doors. I went up to the other side. "We're closed. Won't be open until 8 a.m., I said through the glass. The man looked at me but didn't say anything. I pointed at the sign on the door. "We're closed. Sorry," I repeated. The man continued to look at me for a few seconds, then turned and walked away. I watched him walk until I couldn't see him anymore, but it didn't look like he had parked anywhere. The whole thing was odd to say the least, but I figured he was just at the wrong place or something. I went back to what I was doing, stocking up the shelves and eventually forgetting about the man. By 2 a.m., I'd gotten through half of the aisles and was ready to take my lunch break. I left the boxes where they were and went to the break room on the other end of the building. I was in there for probably a good half hour before I tossed the rest of my lunch and went back to work. I walked through the store and to the end of the aisle I was working on, but just as I looked up, there was a man walking past the other end. He looked like he was just walking across the store, not having noticed me. I froze in place, feeling that instant rush of fear. Now listening intently, I could hear the man's footsteps move toward the side of the building I'd just come from, so I moved into the aisle and hid behind the shelves. The footsteps sounded like they went toward the break room, but just before I left the aisle to try and run and get help, I heard the man rushing out of the room. The footsteps were now sprinting through the store, getting closer and closer. I ran for the other end of the aisle, looking back and seeing the man turn in and start running at me. I ran for the front door, getting my keys out and trying to unlock it with shaky hands. The man appeared at the end of the aisle just as I got it open, and just as I stepped out of the building, I saw a bright flash in the corner of my eye and heard a pop sound that made my ears ring. A gunshot, so loud I didn't even know where it landed, but I sprinted for my life around the building. I made it to my car and hid in the back seat as I called 911. From what I know, the man didn't follow me outside. He was gone by the time police made it to the store, but they found the back door to be busted open, along with some heavy tools sitting next to it. The most terrifying of their findings was the hole created by the gunshot, sitting right to the side of the front doors. Why the man broke in and was so aggressive, targeting me like that, is unknown. From his behavior, the police seemed to think it was some kind of mental breakdown or psychotic break, not having any real reason to target me specifically other than the fact that I was alone. I no longer work there, but I can tell you that for the years following that incident, I was on edge every single night.
This incident happened to me last year on Halloween. My little brother and I were home alone, since our parents had gone out to a Halloween party. They tasked us with handing out candy to the trick-or-treaters. This really bummed my brother and I out because we had made plans to go trick-or-treating with a few friends, but whatever. Our parents told us we were too old to still be trick-or-treating, and that we could instead invite our friends over to the house and just hang out here. Well, my friends declined our invitation to come over because they were still wanting to go trick-or-treating. So eventually and utterly, leaving me home alone with my brother to hand out candy. A lot of people did stop by the house, and by 10 p.m., almost all the candy was gone. My brother and I decided we'd just eat the rest. So we're sitting on the couch, watching a scary movie, stuffing ourselves with candy, and there was a knock at the door. I stormed off the couch, wondering who the hell could be knocking on our door this late at night. I assumed that it was just some late night trick-or-treaters, but even if that was the case, I had turned the porch light off and the Halloween decorations off as well, which is a dead giveaway that we're out of candy or we're not home. So in the moment, we just kind of assumed it was our parents. Being cautious, I looked through the peephole and saw this suspicious man just standing on our front porch. He was wearing a black hoodie with a hood over his head, which made it difficult to see his face. The only detail of his face that I could spot was that he had a beard and dry, crusty lips. There's no way that this guy was a trick-or-treater because he wasn't wearing a costume. He was far too old to be trick-or-treating alone. His hands were stuffed in the front pocket of his hoodie. He also looked really thin. Every single red flag went off in my head about this guy. There's no way in hell I'm opening up the door. Still looking through the peephole, I watch as he knocks on the door again. He seemed desperate for us to open up. He was even shaking. It wasn't cold outside, and definitely not cold enough for someone to be trembling the way he was. He was definitely giving me a bad vibe. I wanted to just get rid of him as soon as possible. "We're out of candy," I shouted to him. I watched as a smile spread across his face, and it wasn't a friendly smile either. "Are you in there alone?" the man asked, almost in a mocking voice. His voice was raspy and dry. "Should I call the police?" my little brother asked me quietly, gripping his cell phone. The man let out a low grumble and said, "Sounds like you're not alone in there." I continued to watch him through the peephole. His hands were still wedged tightly in his pocket, and he was still shaking a bit. I was now wondering if he was armed. I decided to take action and spoke to him in the most intimidating voice I could muster. "Get the fuck away from my house, or I will call the police," I shouted at him. His smile faded, and he bared his teeth. His teeth were piss yellow, and I concluded that he was probably some homeless crackhead. He had a look of fury plastered all over his face, but fortunately, he left without trying to break in. Probably and hopefully because he knew I wasn't messing around with him. I didn't stop watching him through the peephole as I saw him completely off of our property. My brother and I breathed a sigh of relief and just decided not to call the police. We were a bit paranoid after this, however. Watched TV until our parents came home. We didn't tell them about that man, since he hadn't really tried to harm us. But now when I think back on this, I wish we would have called the police because we would have been able to prevent a murder. You see, the next day, we found out that the elderly woman who lived a few houses down from us had been brutally murdered. Her neighbor had found her laying on her front porch, covered in blood. She'd been stabbed multiple times in the chest and neck. My brother and I immediately knew who'd done it, and we told the police what we knew. They couldn't really do much from the information that we'd given them since we hadn't seen many details of that guy's actual face. They went on a hunt for the man, but never caught him, and I continued to blame myself for that poor old lady's murder. I could have prevented it from happening by just calling the police. I think the most disturbing thing of it all is the fact they didn't take anything from the old lady's house. Her house had been left untouched, but he could have gone in and taken what he wanted since her door was wide open. That means he was literally just out to kill. That was his only intention. He didn't want money or jewelry. He only had the urge to murder. Sophomore year of college. The memories. October hits. It's time to get my spooky on and have some fun at parties and dress up. Halloween is absolutely my favorite holiday. About a week before Halloween, one night I just said screw it. I was bored. My Tinder date canceled due to studying for an exam. I was in a pissy mood and I really didn't want to go hang out with friends in their dorms or just get drunk. So I decided to play a little basketball at this park that no one goes to. Basketball really tends to relax me. I just shoot around for about an hour and I knew it would relax me. Then I figured I'd go back to my place and just play some video games. I pull up to this park. As anticipated, not a single car in sight. There's a trail nearby that leads to a mountain. It was a great time to shoot around and just relax. I'm even contemplating putting headphones in, but then I realize as night's approaching, it's best I hear what's going on around me. Sunset hits, and it's a beautiful pink sky from above. Picture perfect. Another 15 minutes pass by, and it's now completely dark. I'll definitely be wrapping up this shoot around very soon. Until I heard a loud piercing scream. Thought it was probably coming from the trail. Then it proceeded with some weird laughs. So I'm like, okay, but spooked. I still don't see a damn thing. So I tell myself 10 more minutes and I'm out of here. Then I notice a car pulls up in the parking lot. The car proceeds to park. I go to the bathroom near the court and I'm telling myself, okay, I'm taking a piss and then I'm leaving. As I'm taking a piss, and I'm not lying or exaggerating here, I hear a whisper from the bathroom stall next to me. I swallow. Shit. It could be a tweaker, a homeless person, or just a troubled individual. As I'm coming out of the bathroom, a car door slams. I'm trying to get my eyes on whoever just got out of the car. I creep behind the small building where the bathrooms are and peek out. I completely gasped and was just in shock. 2 clowns are now walking slowly to the courts and then to the trail nearby. I'm literally thinking maybe I should just follow these 2 clowns, see where they're going so late at night. Then I also tell myself that probably won't be the best idea. I put my backpack on and get ready to walk to my car. I sprint over to my car and hop in, get on my phone and make a phone call, telling my buddies I'll be online in about an hour. I notice someone's now sitting on the bench near the basketball court. I'm thinking it had to be the guy in the bathroom, but whatever, I've had enough. I drive off and get back to my place. And that's really the end of the story. I know it's not exactly what you were expecting and it wasn't as scary as some people might think, but if you remember, this was during that time in 2016 when clown sightings were everywhere, all around the world. It was just a creepy encounter I wanted to share. I'm not sure if anything would have happened had I stuck around. And who knows? Maybe these clown sightings might resurface again.
I don't go on many trips out of but I had it booked for 2 because I needed to be there late into the following day. I was up for no more than an hour before finally getting in bed and turning in for the night. I rested my eyes and tried to sleep, but was laying awake for a long time. I sat up quickly, hearing a thud run through the walls of the house. I stared at the door, trying to think what could have been the cause of the sound, but with no ideas coming to mind, I got up to check. I opened the door softly, peering into the upstairs hallway. It was dark and quiet now. No more thuds, only the sounds of the house swaying in the wind. I stepped back and quietly shut the door, but a strange feeling came to me that had me wait as I thought more about the sound I heard. As I stood there, soft creaks started to go along the floorboards from the other room. I listened with my ear against the door as the creaking moved into the hallway and then began making its way toward the door. I was so in shock that I almost didn't realize that it had to be footsteps of someone approaching. My heart started racing as they came right up to the other side of the door. I put my hand tightly on the door handle to keep it from moving, and only a moment later, I felt it pull down. As soon as I resisted it, they eased off. There was a small moment before suddenly the handle was forced down and they slammed into the door. It swung half open before I pressed my body back into it. I only saw half of their face in the doorway, but in their eyes was an anger that I didn't expect to ever see. After a struggle, I somehow managed to push the door back into the latch and lock it. The man on the other side tried to get it back open, but after yelling a few unpleasant words towards me, he ran downstairs and out of the house. I was still catching my breath and my mind was racing, but I gathered myself up and dialed 911. For such a small town, they came shortly after. The owner of the Airbnb continued with the case after I left on the following day, but I wish I had kept up with it. That man seemed so desperate to get into my room and was in some state of rage, like he wanted to hurt me as if I'd done something to him. Everything about it is disturbing, and I don't think I'll ever get it out of my head, but Airbnbs probably won't be something I take part in again for a long time. I work from home for a cybersecurity company, which really isn't as interesting as it might sound. I have to be online overnight from 10 to 6, scrolling through files full of code to see if anything is a possible threat. It's extremely boring, and when paired with the overnight shift, it makes for a struggle every night to stay awake. One night, just a few weeks ago, I was up at 2 a.m. working and feeling the weight of my eyes. I pushed through the sleepiness for a while, checking my phone over and over, hoping the time had somehow skipped forward. At 2:40 though, I took a break and decided to order some food to get myself some fuel for the remaining 3 hours of my shift. I opened up Uber Eats, and my only real option was Taco Bell, so I sent in an order and got up to get something to drink. As I walked through the house with only the hallway light on, I woke up some more and realized it was raining outside. I looked out the front window and was surprised at how hard the rain was coming down, given I had been so oblivious to it while working. My first thought was how I just ordered for delivery, and I felt really bad for basically making someone run through the rain for my own convenience. I checked my phone and saw the order was already received, so I sat on the couch and waited for them to show up. After about 10 minutes, I was notified that they had picked up the order, so I watched the map on Uber Eats as the car made their way across the town and eventually into my neighborhood. Once they were a minute away, I put my phone down and opened up the front door so we could make the exchange as quickly as possible. I stood at the open door, staring at the end of the road where they should have been coming from, but another 5 minutes went by without seeing any cars. I picked up my phone again and checked, but on the map, their car was still in my neighborhood, and when I zoomed in, I realized they were right around the corner, just before the turn onto my street. I looked outside again, but didn't see any lights from their car. My rightful reaction was that they probably had the wrong house or couldn't see the address numbers through the rain, so I tried calling them. A few rings, then they rejected it. I tried again, but had no luck. Unsure of what exactly was going on, I stayed at the door and waited. I want to say 5 more minutes went by before I tried to contact them again. I called, and this time it rang for a while, but then they answered. I asked where they were and if they needed help finding my house, but as I listened for their response, all I heard from their side was the crackling sound of rain pouring down. After another few seconds, I hung up. Feeling really weird about that call, I checked the map one more time. At first, it hadn't updated, but when it did, it showed them right outside my house. I checked the windows and saw nothing, but knowing they were walking around in the rain like this was giving me a really bad gut feeling. I closed the door and locked it, and I swear I only made it a few steps down the hallway before a loud knock shook the front door. I carefully looked through the peephole. A man in a gray hoodie was pacing around on the porch. His head was on a swivel, like he was checking for any onlookers as he waited anxiously for me to answer. "Uber Eats delivery," he yelled, but nowhere did I see a bag with my food. I stayed in place, not answering or making any sounds. The man got increasingly more hectic with his movements and called out several more times. Then, he suddenly pressed himself up against the door, blocking my view as I heard a few dull scrapes on the wood, before he quickly ran to the side of my house and disappeared in the rain. I called the cops, but his car was already gone, and from what I was told, he was using a scam account. A couple days went by with nothing else to report on, until I noticed a small scratch on my front door. It was an X, but it didn't look like it was made for me to see. It was more hidden, like a personal indicator for something. It could have just been a fluke to scare me, but I still painted over it to conceal whatever that marking was supposed to mean. That night still leaves me with an uneasy feeling in my gut, especially since he had some sort of sharp object in his hand as he waited for me to open the door. Part of me is still convinced that that won't be my last encounter with him.
I was in my senior year of high school about 10 years ago. I grew up as sort of an outcast in high school. I wasn't bullied or anything, but I also didn't really have any friends. I didn't mind that solitary lifestyle, though. I went through school and then would come home and play video games, and losing myself in those digital worlds was my escape. My home life wasn't what I would call bad either. It was just my dad and me, and I love my dad, and he worked so much to provide for me. And when I was young, maybe 10 or 11 years old, my mom got involved with some bad people and their hobbies, if you know what I mean. My dad didn't want to expose me to that world anymore, and we eventually moved away. It was messy, but it was for the best. He tried getting her help throughout the years, but she always turned it down, until one day she was just off the grid, completely. It was sad, but we both moved on, and when I got older, he would have to leave for the weekend once a month for his job. I didn't mind, though. It may seem crazy to some people to leave someone at that age home alone for a weekend, but my dad trusted me. One specific weekend during senior year when my dad left for the night, I started my normal routine. My pops would leave me some money to order a pizza and some soda. We never had soda in the house, so getting this 2-liter with a pizza was like a double treat for me. My night was beginning to play out just like every other night that I was home alone. I demolished the pizza and drank most of the soda, and after a little breather on the couch, I went to my room and started playing some PlayStation. And this is how I would spend most of my weekends, even if Dad was home. I would usually play Call of Duty, but Grand Theft Auto Online had just come out, so I had been spending some time playing that. And after a few hours of that, I decided to play the single-player story mode, and the older I got, I seemed to play the story in games less, but for some reason on this night I wanted to play something with some substance, even if it was GTA. And since I wasn't playing online anymore, I took my headphones off. As much as I game, I hate wearing headphones for long periods of time. I've been playing the story for a little while, and I thought that I could hear something coming from downstairs. There weren't any loud or jarring noises. It was just these sort of small little vibrations and little bumps. Now, I've been home alone a ton of times, and I didn't remember ever feeling any of those vibrations or hearing any noises like that. But at the same time, the noises weren't alarming enough that I was actually freaked out. It was a little after 1 in the morning, and I think it's just subconscious to be a little on edge when you're home alone at that hour. And every few moments, I would hear a little scoffing noise. I'd pause the game and try to listen intently. When I listened, I would mostly just hear silence and maybe an occasional little bump. Just because I was home alone, of course, the quick thought of an intruder crossed my mind. I'm even embarrassed to say that at one point I even thought to myself, are ghosts real? But then I would immediately shoot that idea down. This little internal debate would continue for about 30 minutes. I finally paused the game and went over and sat in my computer chair to just straight up listen for a few minutes without trying to listen over the sound of gameplay. And the sounds started to happen more regularly. The sounds of the little bumps that I initially blamed on cracking pipes or house noises started to happen more often. The little vibrations I could feel were now happening almost every second. It was like my dad might be downstairs. The only thing missing was hearing his voice, though. And the thought of my dad coming home early even crossed my mind, but he would have called me, or at least poked his head in the room to see if I was awake. I decided that I was just kind of being paranoid and that I was getting myself all worked up for nothing. I decided I was going to go downstairs and check it out to prove to myself that nobody was in the house and that I was clearly just letting my imagination run away from me as the night ran on. I crept slowly down the upstairs hall and made my way to the top of the staircase. While I was slowly heading in the direction, the muffled sounds were much louder and I started fearing the worst. The thought of calling the police crossed my mind right away, but I was actually too anxious in that moment. In my mind, I was thinking to myself, what if nobody's here and I just waste the police time? And when I got to the bottom of the stairs, I saw a light illuminating the dark walls coming from the other side of the house. It was the kitchen light. It's possible I left it on, but I'm fairly compulsive and I was nearly 100% certain that I had shut the light off before heading upstairs. I was practically crawling to the kitchen. I was moving so slowly. When I was only a few feet away from the kitchen doorway, I could hear the sounds of rummaging, like someone was going through my cabinets in the kitchen, and that was accompanied by a soft humming voice. And that hum, it was so eerie. I was half expecting to see some big, scary burglar, but the voice indicated something else. I peeked my head into the kitchen, and in the corner, next to the sink, was a very small woman. Her hair was wild, kind of flowing in every direction, and I had my phone in my hand, ready to call the police, but I think that situation just had me frozen in terror, but also incredible curiosity. Then I realized the melody the woman was singing. She was humming, "I got no strings to hold me down." And I almost fainted right there because I knew who this person was. It was my mom. She would always sing that to me when I was very young, and it was one of the only memories of my mother that I actually had left. I couldn't move, and I must have been trembling because she had heard me turning around. A big smile lit up her face, and even though it was my mom, this was not the mother that I remembered. Her teeth looked rotten, and her eyes looked like they were sunken into her face. In a voice that should have been soothing but was somehow unnerving, she says, "There's my baby. What are you doing awake at this hour?" I didn't respond. I just stood there, like some statue. She came over to me and put her dirty hand on my shoulder, saying, "What am I going to do with your father? He's always changing out cabinets around. I swear that man doesn't listen." And then she started to laugh, but it wasn't charming. It was like some disgusting cartoon character laughing. And she turned back around and started humming and going through the cabinets again. I broke out of my trance and went to my room and locked the door. I then called the police and my dad right away. My dad made sure that I was in the bedroom with the door locked. He didn't go into details, but he said that there was a chance my mother might be dangerous and I needed to be safe just in case. The cops showed up and I heard a minor altercation. I could hear my mom yelling at the police to get out of her house. The police knew the situation from myself and my dad who called after me, and I heard a brief struggle and then silence for a few moments. I heard a cop shout my name and told me it was all right for me to come downstairs. I spoke with the police for a little while as another officer drove my mother away. One officer stayed parked outside of my house all night until my dad came home, just to help me feel safer, which I do really appreciate. My dad came home early the next morning and he spoke with one of the officers. I could tell by reading my dad's body language that he was uncomfortable and that we were potentially fortunate to avoid something horrible happening. My mother actually had 2 knives on her when she was apprehended. One knife she must have had when she broke in, and the other knife was a sharp kitchen knife that belonged to my dad that she must have stuck in her pocket when she was in the kitchen. She never used them or even threatened to use them, but the fact that she had them was enough to freak me out. But maybe the most terrifying part of this horrible nightmare was that my mother had no idea where we lived. Well, she wasn't supposed to have any idea. When we moved away, we moved far away, and my dad never told my mom where we moved to protect me. She broke into the house by breaking one of the downstairs windows and crawling in. I didn't hear it at all, so it must have been when I had my headphones on or something. And I thought of my mom just humming and walking around downstairs, potentially waiting for my dad while I was upstairs, and still freaks me out to this day. It's been about 10 years now, and I've only seen my mother twice since that night. She had been in some type of institution for years now. She has no memory of that night, but in all fairness, she doesn't have much memory of anything at all. It's sad, but it's true. Every time I hear that stupid song now, I sort of freeze up. And I just hope one day I can forget about the fear that I felt that night and find a way to remember my mom in a positive light. One thing that I hate almost more than anything in the world is being waited on. I don't mean at restaurants or places like that, I just mean in life in general. I've always been pretty independent, and when I first met my husband, we didn't click right away because we would literally fight over who was going to pay for the check. Fast forward to now, and we have a nice balance of things. One thing that I usually do is take care of the house, and even specifically the kitchen. I cannot stand a messy kitchen and dishes in the sink, and he's infamous for leaving dishes in the sink, so that's why I take care of the kitchen when I can. Now, a few weeks ago, I had to have surgery on my knee. This past summer, I destroyed my knee playing softball and still continue to finish the game doing more damage to my knee, and I put the surgery off for as long as I could, but the pain was too much. It wasn't even the procedure that I was anxious about. I actually wanted to just get it done and out of the way. I was more anxious that I was going to be practically bedridden for a little while. And my husband is amazing, and I knew that he'd take care of me, but I also knew that the kitchen was going to be a mess. I'm sure this makes me sound pretty controlling, but I don't even care. I just love making sure everything's clean. And the day came, the surgery passed, and in bed I was stuck, and I hated it. For me, it felt like I was trapped in a cell. I was told not to move for several days unless it was for the bathroom, and even then I should have assistance. Luckily, we had a bathroom in our bedroom, so it was only a few hops in case I needed to go. The first night I stayed in bed, and the next day at home, I was already restless. I hopped to the bathroom, and when I was done, I realized that I was actually getting around pretty well. When my husband left for work, he begged me to stay in bed and that he would take care of the kitchen and dinner when he got home. All I could think about was that the kitchen was a mess. It didn't take me long to convince myself that I was all right to make my way there for a little while and just do the dishes. I took my time on the stairs because I will admit it was not an easy task. When I got to the bottom, I smelled something strange. Not trash or old food that I was half expecting to smell coming from the kitchen. What I smelled was what I thought at first was sort of cheap cologne. but I know my husband doesn't even wear cologne. And then it hit me harder as I took a few more steps. It wasn't cologne. What I was smelling was Axe body spray. I knew it right away. When I was in middle school, all the teenage boys would spray themselves with it after gym class to mask the smell of the body odor, and I'll never forget that horrible smell. I took a few more hops. I know I should have had my walker at the time, and the smell was so strong that I felt like I could taste it. I knew my husband wasn't wearing that because I could have easily smelled it on him by now in our relationship, and I went to text my husband and said, "Hey, don't get mad, but I actually hobbled downstairs. Why does it smell like Axe body spray here?" After I sent it, I went to the kitchen, and I'll have to be honest, I was surprised. It wasn't a mess. There was a small plate and fork in the sink, and other than that, he was doing a good job at keeping the kitchen in line. I went over and washed a couple of the things in the sink and noticed that the back door, which is in the kitchen, was slightly opened. More ajar or crack than actually open, but it still wasn't shut. Maybe this isn't that big of a deal for some people, but we rarely, if ever, use that door. When we go out back, we usually go out the side door. We usually just keep that door locked and put the recycling bin in front of that door. And I sort of hobbled over to investigate some more, and I noticed that the bin had moved a few inches as well. It was like the door was open from the outside, and the bin slid out of the way just enough to let someone in. I already knew the answer, but I texted my husband again anyway and said, "Did you open the back door for any reason?" He didn't respond right away. I hopped back into the living room and sat on the couch trying to put all the pieces together and put a rational spin on everything. The thought of someone breaking in didn't even remotely cross my mind because we lived in a really nice neighborhood with almost no crime ever. My husband called me back a few minutes later and told me that he had called the police just as a precaution to make sure nobody broke in, and that he was heading home from work as well. I got off the phone with him and sat there quietly waiting for the police and my husband to show up. And then, without noticing, bang, the closet door in the living room shot open. A tall man dressed in black ran out of the closet and out the back door. As soon as he ran by, that smell of Axe was incredibly overwhelming. I tried hopping to the window, but I was only able to get a brief glance of the man as he ran by the side of the house. I noticed a very thick beard, and that was pretty much it. He was out of my sight in seconds. Not long after, the police showed up, and then my husband right after. I gave them all the information I could, but like I said, I didn't really have much to give to the police. The most disturbing part of all of this is that the cops are sure that the person didn't break into the house. There were no signs that he forced himself in, which led the police to believe that whoever this intruder was, he may have had a key to the house. My husband went out right away and bought new locks for all the doors and made sure all the windows were locked as well. No other neighbors reported anything suspicious, which makes it even more likely that this person targeted our house specifically. He also didn't steal anything, which begs this question. What the hell did he want? If he wasn't swimming in Axe body spray and left that door cracked, whatever it is he wanted, he may have gotten.
I was staying at an Airbnb in a neighboring city. This was over 3 years ago now, and although it wasn't completely necessary for me to rent an Airbnb for the night, I had a potentially important job interview in the morning and preferred not to drive 3 hours at dawn and immediately follow up with an interview. I drove over at 4 and arrived around 7. The house was in a nice neighborhood, and it looked like any normal city street with family-sized homes. I parked in the driveway and went inside, almost having my heart stop when a woman came around the corner and introduced herself. I was not expecting to see anyone in the house, so I had to collect myself before even responding. She said she was staying here for a few days in the other half of the house, and just thought to introduce herself to keep things from being awkward. I had no idea this was a shared rental, but I returned the favor and introduced myself as well, then went to my room. I took my phone out of my pocket and went to the Airbnb app to see if I'd made the mistake or if this was some kind of shady ripoff. Before I got the chance to really look though, the woman came up to my door and started talking to me again. She asked a lot about me and was just trying to keep the small talk going, which I tried to signal that I wasn't really interested in talking at the moment, but she didn't seem to notice. If I didn't know any better, I'd say she was flirting with me. It was a little weird considering I'd just arrived, and it was pretty late in the day, so I was obviously tired. After a couple minutes, she finally went away, and I had the chance to check the app. Nowhere on it did it mention multiple rooms for rent. It just said it was a house for rent. However, the pictures did only show a single room, so it didn't really fully answer my question. I sent a text to the owner asking about it, but I was already here and didn't have the time nor energy to make other arrangements. At that point, I was just hoping for a partial refund or something. After getting my bags into my room, I went into the kitchen to prepare some of the food I'd bought on the way up to the rental. Less than a minute went by before the woman came out again and met me in the kitchen. It wasn't until now that I'd taken a better look at her though. She was older, I'd say mid-40s, with tired eyes and messy hair. It looked like she'd either just woken up or had been awake for too long. She started up another conversation, asking me about myself and telling me about her, and it became obvious now that she was definitely flirting with me. I was only in my early 20s, so this was pretty weird and not something I was into. I didn't want to be rude, especially if we'd be staying here together, but I also got increasingly more weirded out as the conversation progressed. She started smiling more and asked if I wanted to see her room, being really pushy about it, even though I insisted on just eating my food and going to bed. As I continued to deny though, her smile slowly diminished into a frown, getting upset at my lack of interest. Just as things were getting creepy, my phone buzzed on the counter. I looked at it, and my stomach tightened. The owner sent me a text saying nobody else should be there and to call the police if there was anyone inside. I looked back at the woman, who still had a distasteful look, and then I heard a door open from down the hallway, followed by heavy footsteps charging through the house. I left everything and sprinted for the door, seeing a man in the corner of my eye running toward me as I left the house and ran for my car, getting out of there as fast as I could. By the time authorities arrived, the man and woman were nowhere around. What they would have done had I followed the woman into the room is unknown. Thankfully, my belongings I'd left behind were still there, but that only concerns me more about what their intentions were.
Several years ago, I was in the midst of an awful divorce with my then husband, full of crazy allegations and typical angry filings centered around custody of our child. As with many divorces, friends and professional colleagues seem to pick one side or the other. In my case, there was one sort of professional contact who reached out to me after hearing about the divorce, who offered to be a witness for my case because of some experiences he related that I had been previously unaware of, regarding my ex's behavior out at networking events. So after this initial call, he started calling me on a semi-regular basis to make sure I was okay. This wasn't really someone I knew prior to the separation, and he was much older than I was, but claimed to have experience with divorce and custody. So I figured it was a good idea to be polite and not alienate him. My lawyer also told me that his testimony was important, so I kept things friendly, but I always had a weird feeling about him. A few months later, he called one day, and my son was very sick, and I told him I couldn't talk and explained why. He then offered to run to the store for me, which I honestly appreciated. But after that event, he kept dropping by uninvited, or he would stop by with cookies for my son. Again, I kept telling myself to keep things polite. The divorce is coming soon. Don't make this guy mad. During this time, he had also helped me set up a security cam system that my dad had mailed me. At one point, I needed someone to walk my dog, and he offered to do it. He used and returned a spare key the same day. One evening, he showed up while I was painting and insisted on sticking around to help, even though I was having my starting over catharsis and just wanted to do it alone. Not long after the painting day incident, he showed up unannounced and uninvited once again, having magazines with random decor saying, "We could finish decorating the house." And I was so weirded out that I made an excuse to leave. I then began ignoring his calls and took my son and dog to stay with my parents for several weeks to avoid these frequent drop-ins. I came home a few weeks later thinking he would have finally gotten the hint. It was a nice and quiet day. The following morning I took my son on an outing, and we both came back hot and tired. I put him down for a nap in my bed and decided I would close my eyes with him. I woke up maybe an hour or so later, and it took me a moment to realize that something was way off. As I'm blinking off the sleep, I realized there was a rose bush sitting on my bedside table that I definitely had not put there. There was a post-it note on it, something about planting it in the yard. I started shaking immediately. I recognized the handwriting and stood up to go splash some water in my face and decide whether or not to call my parents or the police. As I stepped into my bathroom, I realized that the mirror was covered in post-it notes, all with super creepy messages that were intended to be like love notes or with affection. But ultimately, all they did was scare me. I was still waking up trying to figure out how these notes could have gotten here. My front door was definitely locked, but as I went from room to room, there were notes everywhere. I mean hundreds of post-it notes covering the walls, in my cabinets. There was even one inside my coffee maker. I started grabbing them and putting them all into a pile when I got to the one in the kitchen that made my blood run cold. It said, "You're cute when you think no one is watching you." I then realized that there was a security camera pointed right at where that note was left. The one I had set up months earlier when I didn't think he was a psychopath. Called my parents in hysterics, sent them a bunch of photos, and my dad insisted I should not call the police. But he would drive over and change the locks and put a chain on the door. So we immediately changed the password on all the security cameras, which I had installed to document if my ex tried to break into the house. There were 4 in total, 1 on the front porch and 3 inside the house, including 1 inside my bedroom. This man could apparently see and hear everything going on inside my house for months. I realized he had just paid attention to my passwords when I was setting up the system. But the only way I can figure out that he got into my house is that he must have made a copy of my house key the day he had walked my dog. And because my dog had now gotten to know him, he wouldn't have barked to warn me, which also scared me. I was absolutely horrified. This man had been in my house for a very long time now. There's no way he could have put that many notes up quickly. And he was right next to my face and feet from my son while we were sleeping. And somehow, he thought that was okay. I left and stayed with my parents again for a few days, afraid of what he was going to do when he realized that he was now both physically and digitally locked out of my house. When I came home that night, my son was at his dad's, and I was home alone. So I got on the phone with another friend from out of town. At about 10 p.m., he shows up at the door pounding on it, trying the lock, screaming obscenities, and demanding to be let in his house. Gone were all the niceties. This was someone completely furious and derailed. All I could do was hide in my bedroom until he left. This happened on St. Patrick's Day, so I'm sure he'd been drinking. After that, there were several other times someone would start knocking on the door in the middle of the night, always when my son wasn't home. He tried reaching out using fake social media accounts several times, always getting blocked. Years later, I discovered that he had friended my mom on Facebook, and therefore was still able to see all the photos of us that she posted or shared. There was a huge argument when I saw she had left her computer logged in. A conversation they were having about me and how he could get back into my life. I sold that house 2 years later, still finding notes even as I was packing, and I am more than relieved that he no longer knows where I live. I do not post photos of my new house online. I've changed the privacy settings on all of my social media accounts. I avoid all the places he used to go, the network events he attended. I stay under the radar as much as I possibly can. Could never bring myself to play back the security camera videos because I was traumatized enough and didn't want to see just how much danger we were really in. Hopefully he never sees this post, but you know who you are. And I hope to God our paths don't cross again.
This happened when I was 25. I'm a female and I've been dating a guy for about a year. Things were going great, so he asked me to meet his parents. He invited me to have dinner at their family home. It was at his parents' house where something unimaginable happened. My boyfriend was from the countryside and his family still lives there. From where I lived, it took 3 hours to get there by car. When I finally got to meet them, my boyfriend's attitude towards me changed dramatically. It really surprised me. He was usually quite the gentleman, but in front of his parents he addressed me with such terms like you and oi. Just downright rude. He shouted at me using these words like he was commanding me or something. He had never treated me like this before, but since I was in his parents' home, I just put up with it and gave him the benefit of the doubt. I mean, what else could I have done? I didn't want to make a scene or embarrass him. I could see where he got it from. His dad was throwing his weight around and bossing everyone around. His father shouted some command at his mom when she was doing something not quite to his liking, and it was pretty harsh. I looked over at her and she just kept her head down and did as she was told, like this was totally normal. His family were giving off some seriously suspicious vibes. I was starting to really regret coming, and it was so awkward and intimidating. At dinner, his father stared at me and said, "When you get married, you live here." It caught me off guard. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a joke. It was a demand. I'm waiting for my boyfriend to speak up for me, but he never did. So eventually I just said, "Well, I haven't made any decisions about that yet." His dad glared at me. He looked so angry and said, "If you marry my son, you'll live here. Got it?" And he shouted at me, aghast. I stared at my boyfriend, and he must have felt my eyes pleading with him for some sort of help or defense, but he was just as silent as his mother. It killed me when he looked at his father and just nodded. Now, more to the point, my boyfriend had never mentioned marriage to me before, so I was totally shocked by this, and to be honest, our relationship has had its rocky moments. They started speaking of specific dates for a wedding, and the pressure was starting to intensify. Later, after dinner, when I was alone with my boyfriend, I said, "Hey, I feel a bit sick and I want to go home. Something isn't quite right." He didn't say anything, so I decided to start gathering up my things to head home by myself. Just as I turned to leave, he grabbed my arm. "Are you running away?" He boomed. He had totally changed. It was like I didn't know him at all. He forced me back into his childhood bedroom, and he overpowered me. He shut the door on me and locked it. I beat on the door and screamed for someone to let me out. I was making so much noise, there was no way that no one else in the house wouldn't have heard me. Things got worse when I realized that I had left my phone on charge downstairs. I couldn't do anything. I literally was a prisoner, and I was stunned. After a while, the door unlocked and my psycho boyfriend's mom entered the room. I was pleased to see her. I thought that she had come to my aid, but my hopes were dashed instantly when she handed me some papers. "Sign this." It was a marriage certificate. "If you do, you can go," she said in a monotone voice. It was the real deal. "I won't sign that. I'll never marry him." "You think you can escape, do you? Well, go on. Try your best." She asked me to sign it again, and I told her where to go. She walked out of the room and locked the door again. I needed to stay calm. I was terrified, sure, but I needed to keep my composure if I had a chance of getting out. I decided to wait until it was the dead of night, and I turned all of the lights off in the room and kept as still as possible. Figured the window would be my best and only option for escape. I would just have to deal with getting an injury if it happened. I opened the window and managed to climb down into the porch roof silently. It truly was amazing. I walked the whole night through to reach the train station, fearing for my safety, looking over my shoulder for that crazy mother and father. Days and weeks passed after this incident. I got email after email from my boyfriend. "You think that's the last of us? You really think you can get away? We'll not forgive this." Because I was living on my own at the time, I was too terrified to go back to my apartment alone. I asked friends and relatives to let me stay with them. I pleaded with them. One friend who lived quite far from where I met my boyfriend allowed me to stay with them, and I felt safer. With the help of a lawyer and a support group, I achieved what he told me was impossible. I escaped from him and his family. I hear from friends and neighbors from my old life. They say that they have seen him hanging around my former apartment and my old hangouts. Even though I live miles and miles away from him now, I'm still worried that he'll find me or find a way to hurt my family. This happened about 10 years ago. I was attending a really terrible university. I was working 4 nights a week, and I could afford little more than dinner each day. Rent and gas money really killed me financially. I really needed a job to survive. This all happened before I was working. It was summer of my second year. It was one of the hottest days of the year. On days like that, I always went to study on campus to enjoy the free air conditioning. In the library, they have a bulletin board where anyone can post any personal adverts and all that kind of stuff. I often check the board because sometimes you could pick up some easy work. For example, you could do high school students who were looking for a tutor and that kind of thing. Other times there would be interesting advertisements too. Study a foreign language with me. I like the sense of community. You'd see stuff like that. When I approached the board that day, I saw the following advertisement. Cleaner wanted to help clean a room. 5,000 yen per half day. Please contact Tanaka. This was some good timing because I had just taken a test and was about to have a week off. 5,000 yen was a lot to me. It's about $45. That would get me back to my hometown for a couple of days, I thought. As soon as I got back to my dorm, I immediately called the number provided. Hey, I'd like to apply for that cleaning job you posted. The voice on the other end of the line responded, and it sounded slightly bewildered. Oh, right. What days can you work? I told him that I work for the full amount advertised. Can you start at 9 a.m. next Tuesday? I agreed, and he gave me the address. It sounded like a residential address, and I guessed by his voice that he was a man in his 30s, and he sounded a little sick over the phone. My first day of work arrived. The morning was hot, but the sky was free of clouds. When I arrived at Mr. Tanaka's house, I felt the breeze of his air conditioning, and I was worried that I was going to be working without one. I arrived 10 minutes early at 8:50 and rang the doorbell, and a man came and answered it. Right on time. Come in, he said. He was a bit awkward, not one for chatting, and he wouldn't look me in the eyes when we spoke. I took my shoes off and followed him into the house. After we introduced ourselves to one another, he explained what he needed. It was pretty easy stuff. Help with moving heavy things, trips to the garbage dump, and some other light cleaning work. I was shocked by the things he was throwing away. They may have been trash to him, but to a student like me, they were treasures. He must have seen me admiring these things because he said, "If you want to keep anything, it's yours." So I sorted some things into a sort of keep pile and can't remember exactly what they were. I think there were a couple of games, some books, maybe a dirty magazine too. We were cleaning the room at a decent pace. I was kind of enjoying it, to be honest. Before long, his room started to look really good. Maybe we'll call it a day here. I felt him suddenly look my way. It looked like he was pretending to think about it a bit longer, and then he said, "Yeah, that's enough for today." Because I had worked a lot longer than half a day, he doubled my pay. I couldn't believe my luck, and then he said, "Are you free tomorrow? For half a day?" I was over the moon to get another chance to make some easy money, so I agreed. I got on my bike with all my cool new stuff and told him that I was looking forward to working with him tomorrow morning. When I got to his place, I found the door open. I craned my head around the door and called out. He asked me to come in. He was grinning when I walked in. "I have your money here. I'll leave it in this envelope over here." He grabbed me by the hand and led me to another room. This was weird. His whole attitude seemed different. In this room, there was a walk-in closet. There was a heavy-looking suitcase, sort of like for travel. This thing's so heavy. I need your help to help me move it. This is how it's gonna work. I'll push from behind, and on my signal, I want you to pull as hard as you can. Is that okay? He hopped over the suitcase and went into the walk-in closet. I couldn't see him beyond all the jackets, shirts, and all that kind of stuff hanging up in there. After a while, Mr. Tanaka shouted, "Pull!" And as per his instructions, I pulled the suitcase as hard as I could. It weighed so much, but what in God's name did he have in there? I wondered. It must have weighed almost 60 kilos. It was moving little by little, dragging slowly across the wooden floor. There was a clattering sound, and suddenly the suitcase felt incredibly light. "Mr. Tanaka?" I called out over and over, but there was no response. What was this? Some sort of game he was playing? I didn't understand. There was still that rattling sound, but it had gradually quieted. 10 seconds or so had passed, and I couldn't take it anymore. I pushed the shirts and jackets aside, and I'll never forget what I saw. I saw Mr. Tanaka in the closet, hanging from his neck. He must have been either sitting or crouching on the suitcase I had pulled away. He was suspended on the clothes rail in there. I ran over to help. I tried my best to pull the rope from around his neck, but it wouldn't budge. My mind raced with panicking, disjointed thoughts, then one clear one came to me. I need something sharp to cut the rope. Mr. Tanaka wasn't moving, and this was really bad. The rope was way too thick for scissors to be of any help. I had no choice. I had to try and get a neighbor to help. The police and ambulance services arrived. I was interviewed by the police at the scene. My parents traveled up, and when they arrived, I remember I just broke down, bawled my eyes out. Mr. Tanaka was taken away in an ambulance. He lived through the night, but passed away in the morning of the next day. And I couldn't save him in time. The least I could do for him was to finish the cleaning. I thought that it would help me too to do that, but it was so much in the process. I made sure his apartment looked good though. I had some strange compulsion to finish his final request. I went to take my payment, and inside the envelope was a note as well as the money that he had promised me. The note revealed that he had been laid off. His company had been looking to make cutbacks. Shortly after he found out his wife had been cheating on him with another man. His debt and loans seemed insurmountable to him, which is why he decided to just end things. At the end of his note, he apologized to me for all the trouble he'd caused me. He explained how he needed assistance to go through with it, and the cleaning job was just a ruse to get me to help. I showed this note to the police, and it put me in the clear. Police even let me keep the money. About a week went by, and Mr. Tanaka's sister got in touch. He had long been estranged from her, and she revealed a certain truth that hasn't set well with me, and I wish that she didn't tell me. Mr. Tanaka was a believer in a certain dangerous cult-like religion. In that religion, the act of taking one's life is considered a terrible sin and is prohibited. If you did that, then you would be condemned to hell for all eternity. So, he couldn't take his own life, and that's why he needed me. I was given 100,000 yen, or $900 from his family, and his estate for all the trouble that he had caused me. According to Mr. Tanaka's interpretation, am I now a murderer? I wonder if I'll go to hell now for killing someone for 115,000 yen, or $1,050. You can share this story if you feel compelled, and I just want to thank you for listening. I work at a funeral home, and we have a crematorium at work. This happened not too long ago, but I don't think I'll ever forget it. One morning I was sweeping the entranceway, and a black SUV pulled into our parking area. A middle-aged man got out, and I could tell that he was wealthy. I clocked the Frank Meulen watch on his wrist. Nice. He came over and inquired about a cremation service. Well, he literally said, "Can you burn a body for me?" I was taken aback by that statement. Normally, we're contacted by family members of the departed, and they don't always arrive with the body in their car. Then, of course, we need a certification of death and some other documentation. We needed to be informed ahead of time because we need to make preparations. He said that he called my boss already, and the boss agreed to cremate the body today. His tone was pretty aggressive. He said we needed to get this cremation moving fast. I asked him to wait for a moment while I went to check with my boss. I felt kind of nervous. This seemed highly unusual. My boss was the director of the funeral hall, and he said that we have to do the cremation as fast as we can. This was really weird. Why are we doing these things so different today, I wondered. I couldn't do anything about it though, it was just my job, so I went to open the ovens. I saw the body. It belonged to a man who looked to be in his early 30s. I'd seen a lot of corpses before, but there was something slightly different about this one. His cheeks seemed pink. I usually check the corpse before burning, it's part of the rules here, and I noticed that it was very clean and appeared to be without any trauma. I put the body into the coffin and pushed the coffin into the cremation ovens. After about 20 minutes or so, I heard this dreadful noise rising from the ovens. It was like a banging sound. Everything suddenly was plunged into darkness all around me. Life felt incredibly cold as I asked myself the deeply troubling question, was he alive when he went in there? What hurt the most was the fact that there was nothing I could do, because 20 minutes in the ovens at heat that high, everything is already burning. I couldn't move. My limbs were shaking with fear and I felt paralyzed. Was I hearing things? I couldn't be sure. Usually after an hour, everything in the ovens is reduced to cinders, but I couldn't stand that. I needed to know. I managed to pull myself together and stop the ovens, and I noticed that the rich guy wasn't around anymore. I was really so scared, so I asked my boss to open the ovens with me, and I told him that I heard a noise while they were on. My boss opened the ovens, and all the stench of grilled meat invaded our nostrils. It was kind of like a barbecue smell, and it lingered in the air. My boss then pulled the main tray out so we could see, and the body was half burned. It was facing down. I was pretty certain that he wasn't facing downward when I put the body in. I was sure that the man was still alive when he was brought in. I imagine while the ovens were on, he was turning and doing anything in his power to escape. I hadn't been hearing things and I was completely destroyed by this realization. This has never happened before. Never had I seen the body turn over during cremation. I was sat in the main hall with my head in my hands, struggling with the weight of the situation I was in. My boss came over to me and handed me something. 10 million yen, which is about $77,000. He told me that telling my story to anyone wouldn't be worth it. People wouldn't believe me and reminded me that the rich guy I met at the start of this story wouldn't be very happy if he heard that I was talking about what happened today. I quit that job, obviously, but now I'm living on the money that I was given until I get a new job. I'm not myself anymore. I can barely find the energy to get out of bed. I can't really sleep these days. My nightmares are filled with the memories of that day. And sometimes I dream that I'm the man in the coffin and I feel the heat surrounding me. I kick and scream and then I wake up covered in sweat. I am not doing well. When I first got into high school, I got into trouble a few times and ended up skipping school regularly. I would stay at home and watch TV or just play games. I used to take care of my younger brother a lot too. At night, I used to go out skateboarding or go over to a friend's house to play more games. I probably wasn't the best babysitter, I just left him to his own devices most of the time. One evening, I was having dinner with my little brother and we were both watching TV together. I should mention that my mother was in and out of the hospital at the time. I guess that was maybe why I was acting out at school. Every night it was just me and my little brother since Dad worked late. After he finished eating, he suddenly said, "Oh yeah, the phone. I need the phone." My younger brother was 4 years old, by the way. "Hey, where? What? What are you talking about? I need the phone," he kept repeating while running off. Our home phone was in the hallway and he ran in that direction. I was confused, so I went after him. He was trying to reach the phone on the phone table in the hallway. He was on his tiptoes and he nearly had it. He was whining, asking for the phone. No, you can't play with that. Who are you trying to call anyways? Are you trying to talk to Mom? I mean, she's not coming back from the hospital yet, buddy." He started to cry and he shouted at me to hurry up and give him the phone. I had to pick him up and drag him back to the living room kicking and screaming, and he really wanted the phone. Just then, the phone began to ring. The second my brother heard it, he started struggling against me more, screaming about how it was for him. I said to wait there, I'll go get the phone for you, okay, because you can't reach it. And he suddenly stopped his tantrum and then waited patiently for me to bring him the phone. It was pretty weird, but it was about to get a whole lot weirder. "Hello?" I said as I answered the phone. I'll keep my brother's name just anonymous just in case. Yeah. Can I speak to Anon, please?" The voice belonged to an older woman in about her 50s, I'd say. It wasn't a voice that I recognized. It was really strange. I wonder what the hell a stranger in their 50s would want to speak to a 4-year-old about. "Can I ask who's calling?" I asked. A friend." "Huh? A friend?" I hung up and was really confused. I walked back into the lounge and I saw my little brother sat there on the sofa, grinning at me. Did you give our number out to some old lady?" I asked him, and he said nothing. "Have you been speaking to this old lady?" And then he said, I don't understand. I don't know. I hate this." I walked back to the phone and checked the caller ID for the number. It was our area code, but I didn't recognize the number. I tried to call it back a few times, but every time I tried, the line was busy. Meanwhile, my mom came home from the hospital and I explained what had happened. Mom looked pretty freaked out. She was just as unaware of this as I was. From that day onwards, we got calls from that number every now and then. It was weird. Anytime my parents went out, about 2 minutes later, the phone would ring. My little brother would start shouting and screaming for the phone, and then when I answered, the old lady hung up. Whenever I called back then, the line was always busy. I moved the phone to a really high place that I could only reach when I stood on a stool. I didn't want that horrible voice speaking to my little brother again. A few weeks later, I had used the phone to speak to the police about the old lady and the nuisance calls. Once again, I was home alone with my brother. My parents weren't home and I can't remember where they were. I was in the bathroom and I had heard the phone ringing. I thought, it's that old woman again. I heard my brother running to the hallway. Like I said, I was in the bathroom, so I just thought to myself, oh well, he can't reach it. And then I heard this horrible clattering sound. My brother then said, "Hello? Hello?" When I came out of the bathroom, I was surprised to see that he had pulled the phone line with enough momentum to bring the phone down from the high place that I had put it. I ran straight over to him, and he was lying on the floor, happily chatting away. "Yeah, sure. Yeah, come and play. Yeah." I snatched the phone out of his hand and put it to my ear, but all I heard was a dial tone. And from that day forward, my brother never jumped up and down and went crazy when the phone rang. And there were no further calls from that weird lady's number either. 7 years have passed since then, and my brother says that he doesn't even remember this at all. And anytime my parents or I bring it up, he always scowls and accuses us of lying. I'm worried about what might have happened, and I'm worried that they might be hiding something. How did that old lady get our number?
I was home alone for the week, as my family had gone on vacation while I had to stay and work. It was around 2 a.m., and I had stayed up to watch a scary movie in the dark in my basement. I was planning on really scaring myself, while still knowing I was safe in my own home. It was then that I heard pounding footsteps on the first floor. This was a common annoying occurrence when my family was home. Every time they passed through the front hallway, past the basement door, I heard their footsteps. This time, though, fear immediately shot through me at the sound of the footsteps. My reflex was to turn the television off immediately. The basement door was up a flight of steps and around a corner, so whoever it was would not have seen any light. I heard the basement door handle click and turn as I sat in absolute darkness. I moved slowly to be absolutely silent and crawled behind our large television. As I passed it, inch by inch, I noted with panic that its black screen still dimly glowed. I heard footsteps coming down the carpeted but creaky stairs. I froze in my hiding place, listening. For many long minutes, I heard nothing. Had the intruder seen the television's afterglow? Was he standing in the pitch-dark blackness, listening to me? I seemed to lie there in total silence for an interminably long time. My panic began to fade, and I began to think more clearly. Could someone possibly be standing there in silence for so long without making any noise? The basement was so exceedingly quiet that the silence itself began to hurt my ears. I began counting in my head, trying to pass the time, and I didn't dare risk the sound of swallowing. I reached 60 seconds multiple times, and by now my fear had faded, and I was more confused than anything. I estimated I'd been crouched in the absolute black for almost 2 hours, and still had heard nothing. If there was an intruder, none of this made sense. Finally, I decided I'd have to make a move. If I did nothing, eventually the sun would come up and shine in through the small basement windows, and worse, I began to smell something horrible and cloying. Slowly, I began inching my way towards the stairs by the way of the walls. If someone was standing there in the dark, I should be able to go around them and then make a break up the stairs. Meanwhile, the horrible odor grew stronger. Had something died down here in the night? No living person would smell like that. Terrible images of some corpse monster listening for me in the dark erupted in my thoughts, and I moved as fast as I could without making a sound. Just as I finally approached the stairs, there was an enormous clatter, as of something falling or collapsing on the floor. It was at that moment I leapt forward and crashed up the stairs, running out through the open basement door and my wide open front door. Now certain that someone was in my house, I called the police from my cell phone and watched my house from afar. The police came, checked inside the house, and then grimly came back out to question me. They found a body in the house, my elderly neighbor, who seemed to have died of a heart attack. Their belief was that I must have left the front door unlocked, and he must have wandered in my house while dying, looking for help. At first, I felt horrible, thinking that I had sat there in the dark while the old man literally died a few feet away. Then it occurred to me, what the hell was the loud noise of things falling? I asked the police and they confirmed the back door of my house had been left open as well, near a single bare footprint in the mud. Somehow, for some reason I'll never know, there was someone else in that basement with us, silent, waiting, and listening in the dark over the fresh corpse of an old man. My parents lived next door to a small red house. Our backyard faces the side of their house. At the front, there were always at least 3 cars parked outside. Oddly enough, in the 10 years I lived there, I never saw anyone enter or leave. Once, when I was 12, I saw shadows thrown against the far wall that was visible through one of the windows. When my sister moved out, I took her bedroom, a large, open, converted space in the basement, which had a door and an outdoor stairwell which led to the backyard. The door had a small window on it, which my sister had covered with a Pulp Fiction poster. I redecorated and replaced the poster with some of those sheer half-curtain things. The way the room was set up, if I was lying in bed or sitting on the couch, I was facing the door. When I first moved down there, I noticed that sometimes at night I would hear the sound of leaves crunching in the stairwell. I thought it was my cat, who liked to roam the neighborhood. I had no reason to suspect otherwise until a few weeks later. One night, when my parents were away on business, my boyfriend and I were sitting on the couch, smoking. Suddenly, he got really stiff and was just staring at the window. I asked him what was wrong, and he said, "I just saw a camera flash." I kind of just laughed it off and brushed it off to him being high. Who would want a picture of 2 people getting stoned? Still, the seeds of paranoia had been sown, and it wasn't easy to get settled down for sleep that night. I kept looking at the gap between the curtains. There was no light at the bottom of the stairs, so if someone really was down there, I'd be none the wiser. At around 3, I heard the distinct sound of leaves under heavy boots. Definitely not a cat. I don't know what made me decide the best course of action was for me, standing all of 5 feet 3 inches to confront a potential stalker myself. I threw the door open. There was no one in the stairwell, so I ran up the stairs and into the backyard. Standing there was a man in his mid-40s, maybe 6 feet tall, and wearing one of those mechanic jumpsuits. He was holding up a clunky, outdated digital camera. We stood there for a second, just looking at each other. He seemed confused to see me. After what felt like an eternity, I remembered how to speak. "What the fuck are you doing?" My voice seemed to startle him, and he immediately turned and ran through my backyard towards the red house and into the dark. After that, I didn't see any strange flashes of light or hear any crunchy leaf noises. It really freaks me out to think how many nights he could have just been standing there in the dark, watching me.
For a little bit of context, this story took place when I was 19 years old. I am currently 28 and no longer live in the state where this occurrence took place. When I was 19, I worked at a gas station convenience store that was only a few minutes away from my house. I was enrolled in community college, so most of my shifts were evening or overnights. For the most part, the job was normal and boring. We didn't really get many customers during the later hours, and if we did, they usually pumped their gas, paid with a credit card, and were on their way. I decided to pick up some extra hours during our holiday break from school. I figured I could use the extra cash to get Christmas presents for my family. I was scheduled to work 3 overnight shifts in a row, which was a pain because I always found it difficult to fall asleep when I got home in the morning. The first night of my overnight stretch was going by pretty uneventfully. I was biding my time by restocking the shelves and facing the products that had gaps in them. I remember I was bringing out a big box of cosmic brownies to fill our display case when I heard the bell ring and someone enter the store. It was around 2 or 3 a.m., so I dropped what I was doing and headed behind the register to assist the person. I hadn't seen them yet, but yelled out "good evening" to see if I would get a response. I didn't hear anything, so I proceeded to move behind the register to see if the person needed assistance. When I got a glimpse of the person, it looked to be an elderly woman with dark black hair. Her face was covered in wrinkles, but it was hard to really make out anything else as she was bundled up pretty tight due to the cold weather. I saw her moving slowly throughout the aisles, not seemingly looking for anything, but just walking throughout the store. After several minutes of watching her do this, I decided to ask if there was anything I could assist her with. She didn't even bother to look at me or acknowledge that she heard me. She just continued to pace throughout the store. After another 5 minutes or so, she suddenly stopped and stared at the clock that was above the cooler, turned around and scampered out the door and disappeared into the night. To be honest, I didn't really think much of it. I assumed she was homeless and was possibly just trying to get some relief from the cold. We weren't technically supposed to let people loiter in or around the store, but this occurrence seemed pretty harmless to me. The next night, I was sitting behind the counter getting pretty drowsy, wishing the sun would come up so that I could go home and try to get some rest. I was watching a TV show on my iPad around, I think, 4 a.m. when I heard the bell ring. I'm pretty sure I jumped out of my chair as I was not paying attention and dozing in and out of sleep. Startled and trying to regain my composure, I looked at the door to see who had entered, and it was the same woman from the night before. She looked almost exactly the same, except now there seemed to be several scrapes or scratches on her face. I greeted her and asked if there was anything I could help her with. Again, no response, and she began the process of walking up and down the aisles with her head down. I figured I was going to have to wait a minute or two and then let her know that if she wasn't planning on buying anything, then she would have to leave the store. Once a few minutes passed and I informed her, she stopped directly where she was standing, stared at me and said, "The only thing worth bargaining for is your soul." Her voice was high and shrill and not at all what I expected. I responded by saying, "Excuse me?" And she didn't say anything else. She just stared at me with a menacing, almost aggressive look. After about 30 seconds, she exited the store and I watched her walk across the parking lot, hoping she wouldn't come back. The final night of my consecutive overnights came all too quickly, and all I could think about was hoping that this crazy woman wouldn't show up again tonight. I never really had anxiety related to this job, so for the first time, I was uneasy about heading into work. I couldn't really focus on anything during my shift other than staring at the door and waiting for customers to enter. I didn't really leave the register even though I probably could have done some stalking throughout the store. The clock seemed to be moving so slow. It was only 3 a.m. and I felt like I had been there for 12 hours. Shortly after 3 a.m., I heard the bell ring, and there she was, the same woman from the 2 previous nights. She looked even more disheveled, and the cuts on her face had increased and were also noticeable on her hands. Her hands almost seemed red, like they were smeared with blood. I looked over to her and yelled out, "Are you okay? Can I get you some help?" Meanwhile, really only concerned with my own safety. She looked up in my direction and mouthed the words, "Help me," and looked like she started to cry. I told her to hold on and went down to my purse to grab my cell phone to contact someone. I found my cell phone and was getting ready to dial 911, but then I heard the bell go and the door open, and when I looked up, she was gone. I didn't even see her scurry across the parking lot. It was that quick. I decided to call my boss, not knowing what else to do. I had clearly woke him up, but he seemed attentive when I explained what transpired during the previous 3 nights. He decided to come in and talk to me and check the property to see if we could locate her. When he arrived, he decided to go to the back and check the video recordings to see if he could get a visual or description on the person, in case we decided to contact the authorities that someone had entered our store, clearly in trouble and not in the right mental state. He came back up front about 10 minutes later and had a scowl on his face. "Hand me the phone, I'm calling the cops," he said in a very serious tone. "What?" I asked, startled, slightly worried that she might be back. "Come look at this," he said, leading me back to the surveillance room. He proceeded to rewind the footage that was overlooking the back of the building, near the bathrooms. Upon playing it, I watched as the old woman walked onto screen, facing directly towards the store. Seemingly out of nowhere, her slow demeanor became explosive as she began aggressively thrusting her shoulders into the bricks of the building, falling to her knees and intermittently scratching at her face and the store. She proceeded in this psychotic state for nearly 2 minutes straight before she wandered off screen towards the front of the store and entering towards me. The timing lined up directly with when I remembered seeing her. I was in mild shock, with my hand over my mouth as my boss informed me about experiences he's had with various junkies in the past, explaining that some of them seemed borderline possessed without rhyme or reason for their actions. We ended up reporting the incidents and showing the footage to a few patrolmen, but there wasn't much they could do besides reassuring us that they'd keep an officer patrolling the area for the next couple evenings. The way that woman moved still baffles my mind, based on the difference when I saw her demeanor when she walked in. Looking back, her asking for help really made me wish there was something I could have done for her. But needless to say, I haven't worked night shift for quite some time.
So I recently went on a trip with my family to Japan. Overall, I really enjoyed myself and thought it was a beautiful country. But one thing happened to me that kind of puts me off. I decided I was hungry. Seeing a 7-Eleven out my hotel window, I decided to go and get something to eat because it wasn't too much of a walk and there was no room service or anything. So I set off on my small journey to get some food. After buying some kebab things and a strange cake, I went to the small seating area to sit and eat because I was too tired to walk back yet. It was just me and an older Japanese man sitting behind me. I felt someone touching my hair. I turned around. He started trying to tell me how beautiful my hair was, but his English was terrible, so I just smiled and said thank you. This was not uncommon, as I have strawberry blonde hair, and a lot of people in Japan seem to be fascinated with it. People always come up and touched it. I got back to eating, but soon after, the man moved next to me and started trying to talk to me again. To be completely honest, I sort of felt obliged to try and communicate because he seemed so cute and old and innocent. I just wanted to be nice. Bad idea. Shortly after, he starts saying short phrases in English. incredibly sexual short phrases. His English seemed to have gotten better, and he continued to ask me for sex and tell me I was beautiful, and I was very uncomfortable at this point and got up and left the 7-Eleven. At this point, he decided it would be really cool and a fun idea to come with me. At this point, I just couldn't deal with it. I wanted to go back to the hotel and nap. I turned around and began cursing, telling him to leave me alone now. All of a sudden, he got this very angry look on his face and actually spat on me. I was so furious at this point that I turned around, ignored the pain in my stomach, and walked home so angrily I probably looked like a cartoon character. Last month I visited Japan again for an opening ceremony of a new hospital at Hokkaido. It was Chinese New Year and there were many visitors around, and there is a saying going, the more visitors, the more accidents. That night, right after the party, 2 patrons were sent to our hospital. Car accident. It was due to the roads being slippery. The car lost control and spun 40 meters across the road and smashed into a tour bus. Luckily, there were no tourists inside or around the bus at the time, but the bus driver had his lower body crushed where the car had smashed. The driver of the car was an old man heading to a wedding ceremony. Information from the police said that he stepped on the brake too suddenly, that the rear tire slipped. Very unfortunately, the car driver died immediately. Meanwhile, the bus driver was rushed to do an immediate operation. We needed to observe him and decide whether or not to do another operation some days later when he awoke. We found that the bus driver's family had not arrived, and we realized that he was living alone and had no family. The bus driver didn't wake for almost a week. The doctor decided to do another operation since time was limited and they couldn't wait for him to decide. We had to think the best for any patrons. The operation did not go well. From the doctor's information, the patient was bleeding badly during the operation and the health condition of him was not so good. The man died that evening, making it the 2nd death in our hospital. That night, when I went to tidy up the patient's room for the next day's use, I saw a person facing the wall, mumbling to the wall. I tried to go and ask him who he was, but I was stopped by a nurse whom had worked at the hospital for years. She pulled me over and told me never to speak to such people. I suddenly realized that the person I saw looked just like the injured bus driver. I may have just experienced the hospital's first ever ghost story.
It all started when I woke up to the sound of someone hammering on my apartment door. That was the first fright I got that night, heart pounding in my chest as I grabbed the bat I kept under my bed and headed towards the door. First thing I do is look through the peephole to make sure it's not anyone sketchy, but I'm greeted by the sight of one of my neighbors. She looks terrified. She's covered in blood, and I can see just through the peephole that her face is a mess. I open up the door, she runs inside and immediately says, "You gotta get me out of here. My boyfriend's trying to kill me." I start to ask her what happened, and she says something like, "There's no time. Just please get me out of here. I swear to God, he'll kill you too for just helping me." That was what sent me into a straight-up panic, because if a guy was willing to beat his girlfriend up that badly, Lord knows that he'd be willing to put me in the ground. I just grabbed my car keys, ran downstairs with the girl following close behind, because she gave me some lame duck of a reply like, "I'm sure they'll be here soon." If that was me, I'd have called 911 again if they hadn't shown up within like 10 minutes. So what was she so calm about that she was just cool with waiting for them for like an hour at that point? I put it down to booze, and at that point I was okay with waiting too. It wasn't like I had anywhere to be. I sure couldn't just go back to my apartment with that psycho supposedly just a few doors down. But that's also about the same time that I started checking out the amount of blood on her nightshirt. She had like an oversized t-shirt and girl boxers on, and like I said earlier, they were drenched with blood, but also with some blood splattered too, like little spots here and there. She had this cut over her eye, and she had a nasty busted lip, but it looked like way too much blood for just those small wounds. So I asked her if she had any other kind of injuries, like an abdominal wound of some kind that might account for all the blood on her. She said no, and that it was all from the busted lip in her eye. And immediately I start smelling nonsense. I asked her again what exactly had happened back at the apartment, and she started getting weirdly defensive about what she told me. I was starting to think it wasn't quite the abusive spouse kind of story that she told me the first time around, but I had no inkling of what was really going on. That being said, I was getting tired of waiting for the cops to show, so I decided to call them back myself. All I had on me was my wallet, my phone, and my car keys, the only three things I'd had time to stuff into the pockets of my shorts before fleeing the apartment. But when I take my phone out to call the cops, she says something along the lines of, "What are you doing?" I state the obvious, that I'm about to call the cops back, and she's like, "Don't." I don't know if it was the way she was looking at me, the way she spoke, or the way she sort of tensed up when I told her that I was about to do that, but the mood in the room just shifted completely. I asked her why not, then just went right back to dialing 911. But by the time the operator spoke down the line, I looked up and saw she had a knife in her hand. She just said, "Hang up, now." So I did. I'd never had a knife pulled on me at that point, and I can't overstate how terrifying it was. It wasn't even just the knife either. It was the overwhelming creepy sensation of knowing that all wasn't what it seemed. I wasn't hiding from the threat. I was with the threat. I'll be honest here. I basically begged her not to hurt me, and to my relief, she said she wouldn't as long as I drove her to the Canadian border. Given this was in Detroit, the border isn't all that far, but I didn't want to catch charges for aiding and abetting or whatever, so I knew I had to think of something to stop that from happening. It's not like I knew I couldn't tell the cops that I'd been threatened or whatever, but I also knew that the longer I spent in this girl's company, the more chances I'd have of being stabbed. So, I tell the girl that I'd drive her to the border, but that I needed to get something to eat first. I play it like I wanted to stop somewhere on the way, knowing she'd reason me down to getting something delivered from a 24-hour joint. She also stated that she'd be the one going down to pick the food up, as she didn't want me having the chance to sound the alarm. That's where she messed up, because she didn't seem to realize, to my infinite relief, that I could order from DoorDash and put something in the notes about needing the cops called to the motel. My whole plan hinged on there being a driver around that late at night, but thank God there was, and I was even able to show her the order without bringing up the notes section that mentioned needing 911 called to the motel. And the cops played it perfectly too. They showed up without any lights and sirens on, didn't park in the lot, walked up to the motel room without being spotted from the window, then just knocked on the door like they were a delivery driver. She walks over, opens up the door, then boom, they had a gun and a taser drawn on her before she even knew what was happening. She had the knife tucked into the back of her girl boxers, but the cops were wise to her drawing on them, and she hit the floor hard after they hit her with the taser. Turned out they'd been looking for her because, get this, she was the abusive partner who'd stabbed her boyfriend almost to death before finding some poor schmuck, i.e. me, to drive her to the border. Dude almost bled to death in their apartment but managed to crawl to another neighbor's place to get help. You should have seen the amount of blood in the hallway when I got back to my apartment building, and the whole place was crawling with cops and forensic gear. I thought I might be able to drive over to a friend's place to stay the night, contaminating a crime scene or whatever, but they had this section of the corridor closed off so I could actually get into where I lived. The cops came to my apartment in the morning to take my statement down and to fill me in on what they thought had happened. That's how I found out exactly what the deal was. It was 100% the craziest, most frightening thing that's ever happened to me, ever in my life. And just the fact that I was part of it seems completely surreal to me. But the thing that sticks with me is how easily I swallowed her nonsense story at first. How I thought it was helping someone I knew, someone I could trust, when in reality, one wrong move, and I might not actually be around to tell you this. I apologize in advance for not being the best storyteller, but this is definitely a true story. It's also not my story as much as it is my mom's, who used to work at a motel in California back in the 80s. Anyways, one day a guy shows up to book a room, and I'm just going to refer to this guy as the guest, since I don't actually know his name. My mom got assigned to clean his room on the daily, but as time went by, she noticed that he always had the "Do Not Disturb" sign up on his room. So even like a week into his stay, she never once had a chance to clean his room. This didn't bother the cleaning staff too much, because the way my mom tells it, the guy was always super nice and friendly whenever he passed reception or bumped into any of the cleaning staff, always apologizing and telling them that he'd just clean up after himself. So if it saved them some work, they weren't exactly going to complain about it. Anyways, there came a point where the guy wasn't seen for a few days, and the "Do Not Disturb" sign wasn't on the door anymore, so everyone figured that he just checked out and they'd be able to clean the room again. So given that my mom had been assigned to the room like a month before, it came down to her to head over to clean it. As she got to the floor and unlocked the door to the room, a disturbing smell hit her. She couldn't figure out what it was, but she continued to survey the room, which, contrary to the guest's previous assurances, was disgustingly messy. Her words were that it looked like someone had thrown a party, even though everyone was pretty sure that no one else seemed to have ever gone into the room besides the guest. Anyways, my mom was still shocked by the smell, so she tried to track it down. Then as she followed the smell, she could tell it was coming from the hotel room closet. When she opened the closet, there was nothing but a wet-looking cardboard box on the ground, and my mom said the smell got way more intense, so she could tell it was coming from there. She said she had a strong suspicion that the guests had been using it to go to the bathroom in, so the last thing she wanted to do was look inside it. Instead, she puts on some gloves and covers up her mouth and nose, then picks the thing up to throw it into the trash. That's when she felt how heavy it was, like way heavier than if there was just some feces inside it or something. It was only when one of the other cleaning ladies smelled the same smell that they straight up said, "Somebody call the cops." Apparently, a few years before, this same cleaning lady had found a dead body in her room, as someone had a heart attack with the "Do Not Disturb" sign on the door, and it took almost 2 weeks before they finally went to investigate. She said it was like the exact same kind of rotting smell. Definitely not anything else from the human body, so they called the cops so they could come take a look at it. The cops showed up, cut open the box with everyone watching. Then the officer just looked up to his partner with this numb expression, saying, "Call the coroner. We're gonna 419. Someone had to explain to my mom that the number was police code for dead body. Only it wasn't like a whole body in there. That much was obvious because the box was too small. It turned out to be just a decapitated head. I don't really know many more details than that. This is almost 40 years ago now, and I couldn't find any internet archive stuff before I wrote this up. But my mom said that there was talk of the head belonging to a call girl who had gone missing a few weeks before. They gave all the guy's info to the cops, but apparently that didn't help. The credit card was stolen, and the guy had used the name on that card. Imagine being that person whose credit card got stolen, though. One day you think you've lost it or something, and then the next, the cops show up accusing you of having murdered a girl. Mom stayed working at the motel for maybe like a year afterward, and she only quit when she met my dad and moved into his place up in Vallejo. That story always kept me from ever wanting to work in a hotel or motel or anything like that, and no matter how desperate for money I get, I think I'd have to be very, very desperate to work anywhere you might see the darker side of human nature. I used to work at a motel that everyone said was haunted. I must have been there for maybe 6 or 7 months, and I hadn't seen anything of the sort. Granted, I don't believe in any of that kind of stuff, so it's not like I was out there with my spookometer, but one night, I had a little run-in with someone that had me questioning my stance on the supernatural altogether. So at this particular motel, we had what was basically an on-site diner that was just across from the rooms, and everything is single story. That night, we were expecting 2 elderly sisters to check in for a few nights. These 2 sisters just so happened to be friends of the owners and fairly regular guests who came to stay on the owner's dime maybe 2 or 3 times a year. Only, I hadn't met them yet, so I had no idea what they looked like or anything. It was way past dark when they arrived, so while they're being greeted by the owner and their baggage is being unloaded by some of the other staff, I get the nod to head up to their room with a bottle of complimentary wine. So, I head to the bar in the on-site diner, grab a bottle of our best wine, then head out of the back door of the diner and around to the back of the motel. This is a pretty crucial part of the story, as I'd been told the wine had to be a surprise. They'd never have accepted it otherwise, and the owner wanted a little showmanship for his friends, or more accurately, to make it look like he'd bothered to put some effort into it prior to their arrival. Either way, it meant that I didn't see the old ladies arrive, otherwise this story basically would never have happened. There's basically no one else around, and right after I put the wine into the motel room, I head out intending on scurrying away from the room so that the ladies don't catch me having planted their little gift. Only the opposite way I was due to head, I noticed one of the hallway lights was flickering. I swear to God, it was seriously like something out of a horror movie, because I turned to look, and underneath the flickering light, wearing a long, flowing dress, is a headless figure. At this point, it's important to note something about this whole dumb story about the ghost haunting the motel. Legend has it that it was a hung woman whose body had gone undiscovered for so long that she'd rotted to the point where her neck basically tore apart from the rot and the strain. Therefore, it was a headless ghost that was haunting the motel. I know that's about the lamest ghost story you've ever heard of, right? But then imagine being me, seeing that headless figure standing under the flickering light, and you can imagine why my heart went from 0 to 60 as I looked at something that I had absolutely zero explanation for. I think I gasped so loud and so much that my lungs felt like they were about to burst, and that caused the figure in front of me to turn around. Okay, it wasn't a ghost, like I said. There's no such thing as ghosts or spirits or anything of that nature. But there is such a thing as osteoporosis. Osteoporosis is a condition that severely weakens the bones of people who suffer with it. And in older folks, it can mean that they end up with some pretty painful hunching postures, or in this old lady's case, bones so weak that she could barely support her own head. This meant that from behind, it basically looked like this poor old lady had no head at all. Anyway, she turns around, gives me this look as if she'd horribly been offended by my terrified gasp, and I'm forced to explain it away like, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see you startled me. She just frowns, points up at the light, and says something snarky like, better get that fixed, young man, then waddles off along the corridor. I felt like a total idiot. I seriously thought that I was looking at the very same ghost whose existence I've been denying for months on end. I can't even lie. It was one of the scariest and creepiest moments I think I've ever experienced. Back when I was in college down in Florida, I used to work a part-time job at this pretty upscale motel. The motel had this pretty nice pool, and this one time, after a series of pretty gnarly rainstorms, I was tasked with cleaning it. This was really out of the ordinary, as we had an actual specialist that came in when the pool was that bad, but my manager said the guy was up to his eyeballs in jobs and wouldn't be able to come out for a few days, and since it was costing us guests, he told me that if I got it done, he'd let me go early and still pay me my full day wage. Absolutely no-brainer, so I accepted. And then about a half hour into the job, this absolute perfect 10 knockout of a girl around my age comes to the pool in her string bikini and asked how long it'd be until the pool was swimmable. I shrugged and told her I didn't know, that it was taking a long time as it was, and I'd only scooped like a quarter of the debris out of it. But then, to my luck, she seems content to just chill by the pool in one of those sun loungers until I was finished. I got where she was coming from. It was really hot outside, and as pervy as it sounds, I was glad to have some nice scenery to look at while I worked. After a while, she started making a little small talk, and after about a half hour of back and forth with her, I pretty much managed to clear the entire shallow end of plant trash. She then asked if she'd be good to dip her legs into the shallows, and I'm like, sure. But then as she does, I notice a bunch of small, dark things swimming out of one of the filters and towards her legs. She hadn't seen them because she was too busy looking up at me, but I was seriously like, "Get your legs out of the pool." I straight up screamed it. She looks at me like I'm crazy, as I'd already okayed her putting her legs in to cool down, but when she looks down, she lets out this ear-splitting scream, then basically sprints back to her room in tears. If you'd never seen Florida water bugs, now's the time to Google them, and more specifically, to Google how big they can get. Somehow, I'd never seen those evil-looking things until right then, and Jesus Christ, they're a sight you're likely not to forget anytime soon. Worst thing is, they actually do bite people, which is exactly how they got their nickname of toe biters. They're not dangerous, like they're not poisonous or anything, but they're just about the last thing you want to see swimming towards your legs while you're dipping them in the pool. I'm not great with bugs either, so I noped out of there and told my boss that as much as I appreciated the offer of the day off, I wouldn't be carrying on cleaning the pool that day. He was literally like, you're alright, they won't kill you if they bite you. And I straight up told him that I'd rather he fire me than make me clean the pool while those terrifying little things were swimming around in it. Thankfully, he relented and told me to close the pool off by putting the chairs around it like a little fort until the pool guy could come out and completely drain and filter the thing. Apparently, they're pretty easy to kill just by using vinegar or something, but the pool guy still uses protective gloves and stuff because, get this, the water bugs can fake being dead, then just pop back alive into tricking you into thinking you're safe. That's pure nightmare fuel to me. Florida was fun, and I'm glad I got to experience living there while I was in college. But I sure don't miss all the tropical wildlife down there, and seriously, if I never have to look at another water bug for the rest of my freaking life, it'll still be too soon. I recently had an experience I'd like to share here. For the past 2 years, I've worked for a service that places house sitters with clients in need of such people. Besides having to sit in 1 or 2 dirty homes, my job has been without note. There would be no indication that this following position would be any different. I arrived just before 7 a.m. as I was instructed. My clients were on their way out. They were a young couple with 1 child heading on their first family getaway since the pandemic began. The father left me with a few last instructions and they were on their way. The house itself was a nice 2-story structure you often see in more affluent areas of the country. Not my most posh assignment by far, but very comfortable nonetheless. I unpacked my things in the guest bedroom and made myself familiar with the home's layouts. From the look of things, my stay would be a quiet one. I expected to spend my times as I usually do, watching a film or 2 on streaming services or catching up on my YouTube subscriptions. For the first 3 days, everything played out as I had planned. It would be the 4th, which I'd be tested in a way I never thought possible. When I rose from bed that Sunday, the sun was just beginning to peek over the trees. I prefer to awake early when I am working just in case someone is scheduled to drop by. My livelihood relies on my good reputation. I never want to endanger that, and people do talk after all. Just after 7, I sat down to do some paperwork and heard a knock at the door. I answered, and a tall, muscular, older man introduced himself as Chris. He was the neighbor directly across the street. He proceeded to warn me about a recent string of home invasions happening in the city. Although there had been no indication these criminals had designs on the specific neighborhood, he felt it was necessary to let me know this. I assumed to keep my eyes open and stay safe, and we spoke a further few minutes before he said goodbye and I returned to my work. This news was somewhat concerning, but I felt safe. The family surely would have warned me. I assumed that Christopher was being overcautious and tried to put it out of my mind. The remainder of my afternoon was wasted in front of the television, a pastime I seem to enjoy more and more as I age. At around 5 p.m., I decided it may be time to make dinner. There were several large frozen meals available, so I heated one in the microwave. Just as I was sitting down to eat, a knocking came at the door. For the second time, Chris was there to warn me. Only this time, he insisted he had noticed an SUV with dark-tinted windows driving around. They had passed down the street several times. I was kind and didn't laugh in his face, but I wanted to. I thanked him and we went our separate ways once again. I now knew who he was. Most neighbors had that retired person that stares out their windows all day, waiting for the smallest thing to happen. And this must have been Christopher. Despite his entertaining behavior, his repeated interruptions were becoming a bother to me, I thought. And I was fortunate enough to avoid any further interactions with him for the remainder of the day. I slept and rose again just before dawn. I expected Chris would arrive soon, but I was able to enjoy my morning meal and paperwork without any further annoyances. Things were pleasantly quiet, and as I sat down to watch a film, I was beginning to believe that I may have the day to myself. Unfortunately, it was not to be. I had fallen asleep, and just after 2 p.m., a ringing of the doorbell shocked me from my sleep. I expected it to be Chris. However, as I peeked through the small window, I saw someone else. Another man. He was well dressed and I assumed was another neighbor. I put on my kindest smile and greeted this random stranger with a good morning. He looked a little confused but quickly regained his composure and asked for the homeowners. I informed him that they were out of town at the moment and told him when they would be expected back. And he just thanked me and smiled. Something about his smile was unsettling. I was unable to end the conversation before the man rushed toward the door. Out of nowhere, another man appeared and joined him. I tried to close the door, but the might of them together was too much for me. I was unsure what they wanted, but I was positive I needed to call for help as soon as possible. With no other option, I relinquished my hold on the door and ran. The men spilled in behind me. I had no immediate plan, but I noticed the stairs and sprinted up to the second floor. I just needed enough time alone to dial 911. Thankfully, I got it when I jumped into a hallway bathroom. The two men were close behind me, and fortunately, I was able to get the door closed and locked before they could reach me. I pulled my phone from my back pocket and dialed as quickly as possible. I could feel the men's bodies banging against the door as I leaned on it. The operator answered, and I gasped out my trouble between heaving breaths, and not long after, the banging stopped. A loud yelling and rumbling replaced it. Then I heard what sounded like a group of people running down the stairs. Everything went silent after that. The operator continued to talk. I put my ear to the door, and there was nothing for almost a minute. Then a faint voice said my name. It was weak at first. I almost thought it was my imagination, but then it came again. It was now much stronger and closer, and I realized it was Christopher. I meekly answered. I was still unsure of what was happening. "The men are gone. I got a piece of one of them, but I guess they didn't want no more." I did consider that this may be a trap, but I took a chance and opened the door. Standing in the hall was Chris with a bleeding cut above his right eye. He had a big grin across his face, and I got the impression he'd enjoyed his brief fight with the home invaders. We exchanged "Are you okays?" and I thanked him for arriving when he did, and I meant it this time. We met the police at the door and filled them in on what had happened. The paramedics fussed over Chris's cut, but he refused care, and we spent an hour giving statements. When all was said and done, I had to admit I owed Christopher a lot, perhaps even my life. It seems like he was just happy to be right. Once the officers had gone, he wished me luck and returned home. It wouldn't be until I was alone that the seriousness of it all hit me. I spent the evening curled up in a ball on the couch and stayed there until the following morning. I was still quite shaken up, but I was alive. Christopher and I would never speak again. Other than a smile and a wave when I visited the mailbox, life had returned to normal. I didn't want to ruin my client's vacation, so I waited until they returned and notified them of the attempted robbery. They were naturally horrified and even offered me more money. I, of course, refused. I did make sure to let them know that they had an amazing neighbor. And to my shock, they mentioned they had only spoken to him once in the 5 years they had lived there. This made our interactions over the last week seem even more special. I sometimes wonder if Christopher had been put in place to keep me safe, maybe like a guardian angel. I'm well aware of how foolish this sounds, but I believe it nonetheless. I'm pleased to say none of the other jobs have been quite as exciting as this was, and I have yet to meet another man as kind and selfless as Christopher. If you happen to be reading this, kind sir, I know no amount of thanks can ever equal your actions. On that day, you saved another man's life, a complete stranger. Somewhere out there in the world, a man lives happy today because of your selfless act. May your life be long and happy, and may your family remember you forever. I'm sharing this story specifically as an example of what not to do when you are seeking reliable help. To begin, this was 2018. A well-loved member of our family passed suddenly. An already stressful situation was made worse because of the funeral's distant location. We would have to fly if we wanted to arrive on time. Both my wife and I called multiple boarding businesses, but they were all booked up. We then switched course and sought out house sitters. At some point in the search, a neighbor volunteered their son for the job. The boy had always been respectful and appeared trustworthy on the surface. I had my reservations, but time was running out. It would only be 3 days max. I didn't think he could mess up much in such a short time, and we agreed on a price and the family began packing for the trip. Before we set out, I made sure to leave a note for the boy reminding him of his responsibilities and the location of everything he'd need. I then tried to focus on being there for my family. We arrived in town for the funeral and things went as well as could be expected. My uncle and I had been very close during the course of my growing up. He was the kind of guy you could count on in hard times. Without him, many of us felt somewhat lost. My aunt probably more so than myself, and during our 2.5 days away, I didn't receive any calls or messages. I generally take that as a good sign, but I should have known better. What we would discover upon our return was not only shocking, but an honest-to-goodness lesson on who you should trust. By the time we all arrived back in town, I wanted nothing more than to get home and relax. It was just after 9 a.m. when we pulled into the driveway. Everything looked normal from the outside. It was the inside that drove me over the edge. The moment I stepped inside the door, the acrid, sweet smell of booze and vomit hit me. The kitchen itself was trashed. Dishes were stacked over the edge of the sink. Empty and half-empty liquor bottles covered the counters. I was already starting to get angry. Then I smelled the stale cigarette smoke. I despise nothing more than cigarettes. My grandfather was a chain smoker from the time I can remember, and I had to watch him slowly die because of it. In the living area, I encountered 3 young males sleeping. One was the boy, I say boy, although he was nearing 17 at the time, who had left in charge of the home. I shook him awake. Rather than appearing scared, he calmly wished me a good morning. This made me even more livid. Had I been 20 years younger, I may have struck him. I did, however, verbally unload upon him. At first, I demanded an explanation, but quickly realized nothing would justify the state of the house. The other 2 boys were now awake. I yelled for all of them to get out. My wife could tell I was very upset, and she attempted to reel me back a little. In retrospect, I'm now glad she was there. I can't recall a time I've ever been so angry. My temper is not something I'm proud of. Losing control of my emotions in any way is not something I want my children to see. The boys slowly pulled their things together and left, but it wasn't over just yet. My daughter noticed our lab, Roscoe, hadn't greeted us when we arrived. While I made sure the boys left, our kids began searching the house for him. When my daughter went into her room, she not only found Roscoe, but our cat, Midnight, locked in the bedroom with him. It was obvious they had been there for a whole day at least. They had both soiled the carpet more than once. These are both older, housebroken animals who haven't had an accident since they were very young. I could feel myself boiling over. The stupid little boy hadn't even left them with a source of water or food. And after all I'd seen, I had to contact the boy's father. Rather than being apologetic, he tried to stand up for him. He even gave me the "boys will be boys" line. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Weren't there any responsible parents left in the world? I proceeded to go on a tirade, which ended with me hanging up. Now I knew where the boy got his careless attitude. My kids dealt with the animals while I began the arduous task of cleaning the house. The angel that she is, my wife told me to go away and relax for a few hours. My pride told me not to, but I knew she was correct. It did take a while, but I was eventually able to cool off enough to fall asleep. When I awoke a few hours later, it was almost as if it had never happened. The stench had all but disappeared. I'm still not sure how she did it, and the house was just as clean as we had left it. Roscoe greeted me the way he always does, and my beautiful wife gave me a cheerful kiss on the lips. In a matter of hours, things were all right in the world again. Yet, I'll never forget. When they say you get what you pay for, it is true 99% of the time. I knew I should have hired a professional. Somehow I let an acquaintance convince me to do him a favor. Not only was I guilted into it, he exploited my lack of time and tendency towards excessive frugality. The deal was just too good to turn down, and you know what they say about that too. The one lesson I'm hoping to teach everyone who reads this: listen to your instincts. They exist for a reason. We, as animals or whatever, learn from experiences and they inform our future actions. And I'll include one more, as it may be more important than the other. Hire professionals whenever possible. They usually know what they're doing, and if they aren't trustworthy, they don't tend to last too long in the business. Don't let your friends or family hook you up with a deal or tell you they're just as good. Learn from my mistake. No one ever regrets hiring the right person for the job. My story takes place in 2014. I was 2 years out of college and couldn't keep a job to save my life. My attitude wouldn't change until much later. Anyhow, I got connected with a house-sitting agency. The job itself was cool, but the woman running the place was just a jerk to everyone. You may be seeing a pattern here, but I promise you, in this case, I wasn't the actual problem. Well, I put up with her terrible attitude for as long as possible. Nevertheless, the day came when I gave her a piece of my mind. I've gotten a whopping 3 months of experience in the business at this point, and somewhere in my crazy mind I got the idea I knew the business better than her, and I decided to go independent. I put up a post selling my skills on a few sites. Nothing came out of it at first, but I got my first call on that following Monday. This job unfortunately fell through at the last minute. I was back at the beginning. It took 6 more days before another offer came through, and this was from a family just 10 miles from me. They were planning a vacation and needed someone to take care of their dog. The father with whom I spoke sounded very nice. We made an appointment for the following day for me to come around. The next day I dressed in my best outfit and drove out to meet them. The house was set off by itself on 4 acres near the county line, a mostly rural area. I'd sat for another family nearby, so I had no reason to be suspicious. As I pulled up to the house, I was a little disappointed by the state of the place. Despite being a large house, it was somewhat run down. Also, the family's 2 cars were at least 10 years old and a little beat up. I didn't want to be a snob, but I had a feeling the inside wouldn't be much better. The idea of spending 3 nights there sounded a lot less appealing now. None of this mattered, though. I had made an appointment and I was going to keep it. Besides, nothing said I had to take the job if I didn't want it. With all this in mind, I rang the bell and put on my happiest face. The door was answered by a well-dressed young man who identified himself as the father. It did strike me as odd that a man would dress so neatly but stop at his shoes, a pair of old, raggedy running shoes, but I assumed he had a reason and put it out of my mind. He invited me in and we sat together in the kitchen. I was relieved to see that the interior was in better shape, but I did notice a slight musty smell. The job was looking a bit of a mixed bag. I was leaning toward turning it down, but what came in the next half hour or so would determine my final decision. While we waited for his wife to join us, the man and I made small talk. I was told she was putting the kids down for a nap and would be just a moment. I could hear movement down the hall. There was no indication that he was lying. However, as the seconds passed, small little things began to bother me. For starters, there was no sign any pets or children lived there. No toys laying around, no sippy cups, no water bowls or dog beds. The closer I looked, the less it looked like anyone lived there at all. Yet, it was fully furnished, but no dishes sat on the counters or appliances ran in the background. I began to feel a slight unease. Something was telling me to get out. And while this was all going on inside my head, the father was talking. He was telling a story and using his hands a lot. And this was when I noticed his fingernails. Why would a man who seemed to care so much about his appearance have such dirty fingernails? Strike two. This is a mid-level office worker if I had to guess. He would certainly not be doing manual labor. Even if he had a hobby like woodworking, wouldn't he bother to at least clean under his nails? I'm well aware of how stupid this all sounds, but put it together, with all the other things I've noticed, my instincts were telling me to leave. I knew if something was wrong, I needed to play it cool. If not, I didn't want to cause a scene. No sense in destroying a business before I even got it off the ground. As calmly as I could, I said I had forgotten something in my car. I'd go out and grab it, then return in just a moment. I smiled and stood up. As I turned to walk away, the man grabbed my wrist and held me. Strike three. This was all the proof I needed. My heart began to pound. He looked at me and spoke through gritted teeth. "You're not going anywhere, honey." All the kindness had left his voice. The true face now stared coldly back at me. Panic surged through every inch of my body. I knew I wasn't going to leave this place the same person I was when I entered. That is, if I ever left at all. I noticed his eyes jumping back and forth from me to the hall. He appeared nervous. Perhaps his partner or partners were being detained by something. All I knew was that I had to get away before they arrived. I waited until he looked toward the hall again and took my chance. I yanked my arm away as hard as I could. His temporary lack of focus gave me just enough advantage to break free. I ran straight for the front door. I had wisely worn flats instead of my usual heels. This decision was the thing that allowed me to get away. Any woman reading this knows why. And no sooner had I broken free, my captor yells out to his accomplices. Why he hadn't called to them until now still eludes me. Not bothering to lock my car door was another choice I'd made that would ultimately benefit me. The distance, although just a few feet from the door to my car, seemed like miles. I made it into my car and was able to lock the door before they managed to catch me. I did finally get the car going and sped away from the property. As I sped down the highway, I called 911 to report my near abduction. I wasn't sure if my attackers were still pursuing me or not. I made for the nearest police station. I didn't dare let my guard down until I was safely inside the building and speaking to an officer. I quickly repeated my incident to the cop. He filed a report while we waited to hear from the patrol cars that had been sent to the house. It wasn't a shock to hear that the men had fled. What did shock me was what the officers discovered in the master bedroom. The report stated the following, but I will be paraphrasing. When officers White and Dawson reached the largest bedroom of the home, they discovered it had been stripped bare of furniture. In place of the furniture, the walls and floors had been covered in multiple layers of what looked to be contractor's plastic sheeting. What purpose the assailants had in mind for the room can only be guessed at this time. I still tear up at the thought of what awaited me in that room. I've never been a religious person, but I can't help but feel someone or something was watching out for me that day. I wish I could say that my would-be attackers were caught and are now doing life in prison, but the truth is, they remain unidentified to this day. I
I decided the independent house sitting business wasn't for me. In retrospect, my overconfidence in my ability to protect myself is what led me to that house, and no one could have convinced me I was wrong. Since that day, I've become much more vigilant about my safety. I don't go anywhere without crossing all my T's and dotting my I's. By far, the most important thing I do is listen to my instincts. They are what saved me that day. And don't worry about offending someone if you feel you may be in danger. We have these senses for a reason. Please, pay them close attention and be careful, ladies. Goodbye, and stay safe.
Our official merch store is finally here. If you want to support more of our channel, check out our merch shop. The link is in the description down below. See you on the next video.